Chapter 412. Phew! Luna tried her best to prevent herself from making any strange noises as the refreshing cold soothed the scorching heat and greasiness from the spicy grilled fish. She slowly opened her eyes and exhaled gently. The refreshing aroma of green tea lingered in her mouth, and Luna felt as if her entire body had been rejuvenated. This is far superior to the top-grade green tea from Vic Mountain. Even the tea leaves from that 1,000-year-old tea tree that Grandpa is only willing to put in 2 or 3 leaves at a time are far superior to the green tea in this ice cream. What kind of top-grade green tea is this? Just a single lick of this is enough to make me feel so energized and refreshed. Even my stomach is beginning to feel lighter and more comfortable. Luna stared at the ice cream in her hand with incredulity on her face. She was an expert in tea, so she was well aware of what such top-grade tea leaves entailed. If a cup of green tea of this quality were to be sold in Rodu, it could fetch hundreds of thousands of copper coins. If there were a few tea aficionados at an auction, the price could be even higher. After all, the tea leaves from the 1,000-year-old tea tree at Vic Mountain were sold for 100,000 copper coins, and the quality of this cup of green tea was clearly superior to that of the tea tree. However, Meg was using such top-grade green tea to make ice cream. If her grandfather were to find out about this, he would most likely be hopping mad. However, this taste is really delicious. It's sweet but not greasy, and it's refreshing and delectable. This flavor is so intoxicating, and the feeling of licking it is so wonderful. Luna licked the corner of her lips with the tip of her tongue before licking the ice cream. She was completely intoxicated by the flavor. It's so sweet. It's so sweet. It's so sweet. This feeling is so blissful. Ignatsu had already licked most of the chocolate ice cream in his hand, and a blissful expression appeared on his chubby face. He loved sweet food the most, and this chocolate ice cream was the most delicious dessert he had ever tasted in his life. With a light lick, the rich and smooth chocolate and the alluring aroma of milk fused together in his mouth. The texture was rich and mellow, and he felt as if he had been thrown into a jar of honey. The sweetness completely drowned him, and this feeling was simply too blissful. Delicious, delicious, sweet. Parber stood on the ground and licked the ice cream with both hands. Due to the fact that his hands were a little unstable, some of the ice cream ended up on his nose and face. He swayed as he ate, and before he knew it, he had arrived at the table where the 2 bird cages were placed. There was an empty plate in front of Green Bean's birdcage, and it was combing its feathers with its head lowered, showing no interest in the ice cream. "Little fellow, is the ice cream tasty?" A low voice suddenly came from the cage, covered with a black cloth. "It's delicious." Parber nodded vigorously before licking the ice cream with a joyful expression on his little face. "I actually have something that's even more delicious than ice cream. Do you want it?" The low voice sounded again, and it was very tempting. "Better than ice cream?" Parber looked at the ice cream in his hand, and then at the birdcage covered by the black cloth with a hesitant expression. "That's right. It's in the cage right in front of you. If you climb up and remove this black cloth, I'll give it to you. It's something that's even more delicious than ice cream." The voice continued to tempt him. "Yay, yay." Parber immediately nodded with elation. He looked around and began to climb onto the chair next to him. This time, he found a bar that he could step on, and he climbed onto the chair with all his might. He held the vanilla ice cream in one hand, and the black cloth covering the birdcage in the other. "Parber, what are you doing?" Miranda was the first to notice Parber standing on the chair, and she was a little confused. Everyone was immersed in the delicious ice cream, and they also turned to look at Parber with confusion. They didn't know when he had climbed onto the chair, and they didn't know what he was trying to do. Amy looked at Parber with a serious expression and said, "You better not remove that black cloth. Otherwise, you might." However, before she had a chance to finish her sentence, Parber had already pulled down a corner of the black cloth. The black cloth fell to reveal a metal cage, as well as a featherless black crow in the cage. Parber's expression and movements immediately stiffened. "Hello, my little cutie," Black Coal greeted in a warm manner. "Wah." Parber immediately burst into tears. He took a few steps back, and the ice cream in his hand shook. The snowball on top flew out and was about to land on the ground. "Wasting food is shameful. Black Coal stuck his head out of the cage and opened his mouth to catch the snowball. The snowball was about the size of a baby's fist, and due to the force of the fall, it rolled down his throat and got stuck in his neck. It looked as if he had grown a large Adam's apple. "It's so ugly." Amy looked at the bawling Parber and shrugged with a resigned expression. "Wow, that bird is so ugly," Daphne exclaimed as she covered her eyes with her hands and only dared to peek through the gaps between her fingers. "Yeah, where's its feather? And its neck is so big." Jessica nodded in agreement. "Am I the only one who thinks that it looks a little cute like this?" Ignatsu asked with a perplexed expression. He licked his ice cream as he cackled like a pig. "Coo, coo coo." Black Coal jumped up and down in the cage, as if he wanted to comfort the bawling Parber. However, there was a snowball stuck in his throat, and he couldn't utter a complete sound, making him appear rather comical. Miranda slowly made her way over to a chair and looked at Parber with a serious expression as she said, "All right, it's all right now. Don't cry. A man can't cry for no reason." But, this bird is so ugly." Parber pursed his lips as he tried to stop himself from crying. He pointed at Black Coal in the cage with an aggrieved expression. "Coo, coo coo." Black Coal stuck his head out of the cage and seemed to have something to say. "Parber, it's not right for you to say that." Miranda shook her head at Parber. Black Coal nodded with a smug expression as he looked at Parber. "Look, even though it's ugly, at least it knows that it's too ashamed to face anyone, so it hid behind the black cloth. You were the one who removed the black cloth, so you can't blame it for being scared," Miranda continued. Slap. Chapter 413. Host, a serious reminder from the system. Even though all of the ingredients provided by the system come from nature and are non-toxic, it's not advisable to eat too much ice cream at once. Otherwise, it could cause a heavy burden on the stomach. Please limit the amount of ice cream consumed to avoid unnecessary accidents. The system's voice sounded with a hint of seriousness. "I see. I almost forgot that eating too much ice cream is indeed not a good thing. It's easy to get diarrhea." Meg came to a sudden realization. He had forgotten everything after being coaxed by Amy, and he agreed to everything she said. It looked like he still couldn't allow her to eat as much as she wanted. "System, how many ice creams are within the tolerance range of a normal person?" Meg asked internally. Limiting the amount of ice cream he could buy was naturally the simplest method. 3 for normal humans and 2 for children, the system replied. "All right, then I'll limit it to 2. Meg nodded without any hesitation. He licked the mocha ice cream in his hand, and a joyful smile appeared on his face. Such a delicious ice cream was completely worth the effort he had put into concocting it in the test field for the god of cookery. Paired with the best ingredients, the exquisite texture was far superior to all of the high-grade ice creams he had tasted in his past life. It could be said that it was on a completely different level. Even he felt like he could eat 10 more, let alone a child. "Father, I want to eat more ice cream. I want to eat green ice cream this time, one that's the color of grass." Amy turned to Meg as she spoke. She had already finished her 2 snowballs, and she opened her mouth to take a bite of the eggshell, upon which a crunching sound rang out. It was extremely delicious and fragrant. "All right, but Amy, you can only eat 3 ice creams at most for lunch." Father was wrong. Ice creams are too cold, so eating too much of them can cause stomach discomfort, Meg said with a smile. Amy faltered momentarily before turning to Mag with a pitiable expression and asked, "So I have an ice cream that I can't have for lunch today?" "That's right, but that's all right. You can have the last one at night." Meg nodded. At the sight of Amy's pitiful expression, he wanted nothing more than to immediately grab a large handful of ice creams and shove them into her arms. "They're all yours. You can have them all." "All right, then. I don't want the fragrant ice cream. I want the chocolate one. I'll eat the last one since it's the sweetest." Amy nodded obediently. "Okay." Meg nodded with a smile. "Mr. Mack, I think you were born for food. You will definitely be recorded in the history of the Nora continent. The food you invent will change the world." Cece looked at Mag and praised from the bottom of her heart. "We've been to many places in the past, but we've never tasted such delicious food, such a refreshing cooking method, and such a novel idea. You're a genius. You flatter me. I was just lucky. Meg smiled. He wasn't very interested in changing the world. His current goal was to improve his power as quickly as possible so that he could cook all kinds of delicious food for Amy. If possible, he wanted to find Amy's mother so that Amy could live a life with her mother by her side. The ice cream served as the dessert after the meal, and it elevated the atmosphere of this gathering to the extreme. The cold and smooth ice cream brought an incomparable experience to everyone, and it brought with it a powerful and delicious impact, elevating everyone's sense of happiness and satisfaction to the extreme. Burp. I'm so full. I'm so happy. Ignatsu burped as he stroked his round little tummy with a blissful expression on his chubby face. This is the most delicious meal I've ever had. Thank you, Amy. Jessica licked the ice cream off the corner of her lips with a smile as she looked at Amy. You're welcome, Jessica. Come and play with me often in the future. That way, I'll be able to invite you to stay for dinner, Amy whispered into Jessica's ear with a smile. No, I can't. My mother said that only good children can eat at home. Jessica shook her head with a smile as she said, but I'll still come and play with you. Luna turned to Rebecca with a smile and said, Mother Jessica should be old enough to go to school, right? If you need me, I can help her apply for admission to Chaos School. For a child of her age, studying in a school is better than anywhere else. Thank you, Teacher Luna. Yes, it's about time for her to go to school. Her father told me that I had to send her to Chaos School in the future so that she could learn more words. Rebecca nodded with a slightly dejected expression as she said, but I really don't have the money to send her to school right now, so she'll have to go to school later. Don't worry, Jessica is so smart. She'll be able to catch up even if she goes to school later. Luna looked at the dejected Rebecca with a hint of sympathy and heartache in her eyes. It was already difficult for a woman to make a living with her daughter, let alone send her to school. Meg took a glance at Jessica, who was playing happily with Amy and the others. She was at the best age, and being able to play with her peers at school was indeed much better than wandering on the streets and being looked down upon by passers-by, or doing some boring repetitive work at home. It was a chance to shape one's worldview, absorb knowledge, and change the trajectory of one's life. After dinner, Yabamiya and Sally took the children out to play with their kites, and Sally was responsible for cleaning up the table. Cece rose to her feet with Lulu and turned to Meg with a smile as she said, Thank you for your sumptuous hospitality today, Mr. Mack. We had such a great time eating and playing. I have to go look after the shop, and Lulu also has to go back to work, so we'll be going now. All right, we'll come again next time. Meg nodded with a smile as he looked on at Cece and Lulu, who were greeting everyone in a friendly manner before leaving. Mr. Meg, I also have something to do in the afternoon, so I'll be taking my leave now. Thank you very much for your hospitality today. Luna also rose to her feet as she turned to Meg. You're welcome, Ms. Luna. Please come again next time. Meg nodded with a smile. Luna took a couple of steps before stopping. She turned around to look at Meg and hesitated momentarily before asking, I'm very curious about something. If you don't mind, Mr. Meg, what type of green tea did you put in the ice cream? It's Longjing green tea, a type of green tea that only I know about, Meg replied with a smile. Chapter 414. After sending off all of the guests, Amy sat at the entrance of the restaurant with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She was looking at the purple crystal in front of her when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned around to look at Meg, and her pointy little ears twitched playfully as a sweet smile appeared on her face. Father, the kids had a lot of fun. Thank you. It's all thanks to Amy's good hospitality. That's why they were so happy. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile. Even though it was a little tiring to have to host a party on a day off, the smile on Amy's face made all of that tiredness disappear. Amy's smile became even more vibrant as she happily shared all of the gifts she had received with Meg. Some of them were expensive gold bracelets, while others were just flowers that had been picked from the roadside. However, Amy was very happy with all of them, and didn't differentiate between them based on how expensive they were. Meg was very pleased to see this. The value of a gift was completely different from the thought behind it, and Amy was already able to understand this. She knew just how much that purple crystal meant to Jessica. He sat at the entrance of the restaurant with Amy in his arms for a while, and she fell asleep in his arms. A gentle smile appeared on Meg's face as he looked down at Amy, whose eyes were closed and whose eyelashes were trembling slightly. Boss really is a good father. If only I had a father like him. I've never seen him before, and I don't even know his name, let alone being held by him. Yabamiya stared blankly at Meg, who was sitting at the entrance with Amy in his arms, and his eyes were filled with envy. Meg carefully carried Amy upstairs and put her to bed. When he came downstairs, he saw Yabamiya tapping his fingers with his head down, seemingly deep in thought. Just as he was about to say something, Yabamiya suddenly looked up as if he had mustered up the courage to look at Meg, and asked, "Boss, can you be my father?" Huh. Meg's eyes widened in shock as he stared at Yabamiya. Although Yabamiya was only 17 years old, he was only in his early 30s. Being called uncle already made him feel old, and now she actually wanted to call him daddy? Is this the legendary "I treat you as a friend, but you treat me as your father"? Meg's mind was in a mess as he tried to think of a tactful way to reject Yabamiya's strange request. Boss, it's not what you think. I just want to ask, can you hug me like a father, just like how you hug Amy? Yabamiya quickly realized that she had said something wrong, and a faint blush appeared on her face. She hurriedly waved her hands and lowered her head, not daring to look into Meg's eyes. I've never been hugged by my father before. It must have felt very warm, right? Sally was just about to walk out of the kitchen when she stopped in her tracks. She looked at Yabamiya's back with a pained expression. Ever since she met that frost dragon girl that night, Yabamiya's emotions had changed. Even though she tried her best not to show it, she had been spacing out more often than before. Looks like Mia really wants to be acknowledged, regardless of whether it's by the humans or by the dragons. It's just that there's no way the dragons would accept her as a half-dragon. Sally sighed internally as she looked up at Meg. Meg looked at Yabamiya, whose shoulders were trembling slightly, and a gentle look appeared in his eyes. He hesitated momentarily before gently placing a hand on Yabamiya's head, and said with a smile, "Mia, trust me, your father will come back for you one day. When that time comes, he'll give you a warm hug, a hug that truly belongs to a father." Yabamiya felt the warmth on her head, and slowly raised her head to meet Meg's gentle gaze. A determined look appeared in her eyes, and she nodded firmly as she said, "Thank you, boss. I'm sure he'll come back. Boss really is a good person. What kind of fairy gave birth to a child like him, and why doesn't he live with them?" Sally looked at Meg, who was placing a hand on Yabamiya's head. His gentle expression made her feel quite moved, and at the same time, she was curious. "By the way, I have a guest who wants to book the entire restaurant tonight, and I've agreed. If you don't have anything else to do tonight, can you work overtime? I'll pay you separately." After calming Yabamiya down, Meg turned to the two of them with a smile. "Book the entire restaurant? Boss, didn't you say that you don't book the entire restaurant?" Yabamiya turned to Meg with a perplexed look. She still remembered how Meg had rejected Sconard's offer a few days ago. Sally was also looking at Meg with a curious expression. She wondered who it was that could make Meg continue to open the restaurant and book the entire restaurant on his day off. The City Lord is the one who booked the entire restaurant. Tonight, we're hosting representatives from the giant dragons and demons from the Demon Islands. The meeting will be hosted by the City Lord's castle, and it will be held in our restaurant. The business hours will be the same as usual. Furthermore, during normal business hours, the restaurant doesn't book the entire restaurant as that would affect the dining experience of the customers. Furthermore, there really aren't many people who can afford to book the entire restaurant. However, the City Lord's castle is a little special this time. I want to rent a portion of the restaurant's outdoor seating area. If the City Lord's castle can agree to this, it might make things easier for me, Meg explained. He didn't try to hide the reason behind his request from them. It's the City Lord? And the guest is a powerful being from the dragon race and demon race? Yabamiya's eyes widened with incredulity. There must be some conflict between the dragon race and demon race due to their territorial disputes. I just didn't think that the City Lord of Chaos City would hold the conference in Mamie's restaurant. This has never happened before. Sally also wore an incredulous look on her face. There had always been territorial disputes between the elven race and the human race, and Chaos City had mediated on many occasions. As such, she was quite familiar with these matters. Her father had represented the elven race at the conference in the past, and all of the representatives were at least at the 9th tier or above. That's right. I really don't want to make you work on your day off, so I'll pay you 3 times the usual overtime pay. At the same time, you can also choose to order whatever you want for dinner tonight. Meg nodded with an apologetic expression. It was indeed quite infuriating to have to work on their day off. Yabamiya hurriedly shook her head and said, "Of course not. I don't have anything else to do today anyway. There's no need to pay 3 times the usual overtime pay." Chapter 415. So this is Chaos City? As expected, it really is the only city on the Norland continent that can compare with Rodu. Furthermore, there are all kinds of races coming and going here. What an interesting city. Within an extravagant deer carriage constructed from green tree branches, a slender hand lifted the curtains of the carriage. Blower looked at the stream of people entering and exiting the city gate, and a smile appeared on his handsome face. The carriage was very spacious and was being drawn by 2 brown deer that were over a head taller than normal horses. They had a pair of large black antlers on their heads and were quite eye-catching among the long line of people waiting to enter the city. That elven girl is so beautiful. She is. I've seen elves in the past, but I've never seen such a beautiful one. All of the passers-by's eyes lit up at the sight of Blower, and they began to discuss quietly among themselves. Bullshit. That's a fucking man. Why are you looking at me like that? A middle-aged dwarf pursed his lips, but he still murmured to himself, but he really is fucking beautiful. Sigh, looks like I really am the center of attention no matter where I go. How frustrating. Blower lowered the curtains of the carriage and heaved a resigned sigh as he closed his eyes. The young mistress of the Brewster family is working as a waitress in a small restaurant? If news of this were to spread, all of those old geezers who are still waiting for her to replace Princess Irina would probably be so scared that their teeth would fall out. Blower murmured to himself as the carriage slowly drove forward. He opened his mouth to yawn and shook his head as he murmured to himself, "Forget it. I'm going to take a beauty nap for a couple of days after I get there. I can't let anything affect my recovery. City Lord, we've already made a rough estimate of Woodrow's abuse of civilians, embezzling compensation and relief funds, and allowing his nephew, Warwick, to humiliate and oppress the families of the deceased miners. At least 50 civilians have been killed, including 35 women and 5 children under the age of 10. Woodrow has embezzled over 6 million copper coins in compensation and relief funds from the miners, and we're still investigating the crimes committed by the guards and Warwick's hired thugs. The scope of the crimes has already expanded beyond the area where the families of the deceased miners are living, and the number of victims is still increasing. Within the City Lord's castle, an official looked at Michael, who was sitting behind a desk, and spoke with a grave expression. There was undisguised shock and fury on his face. City Lord, the Lord of the Grey Temple has already signed the document. Apart from the members of the Grey Temple who have to carry out their missions, the 10 elders have already gathered. They will cooperate with the City Lord's castle in the inspection of the other patrolmen's manors. Another official quickly walked in and reported. Tell them to set off right away and conduct a thorough investigation. I want to see just how many bastards like this there are in Chaos City. I want to see just how many dirty things have been going on right under our noses without us knowing. Michael clenched his fists as he spoke in a grim voice. Yes. The official hurried out of the room, and he couldn't help but pick up his pace. Chaos City was most likely going to be turned on its head this time. Continue to investigate Woodrow's case. Even though justice is already late, we have to make sure that all of the civilians know that we're always there. Have the finance department conduct an overnight investigation and calculate all of the compensation and relief funds that have been embezzled from the families of the deceased miners. At the same time, compensate all of the civilians who were killed by Woodrow and Warwick, and make sure that they're properly taken care of, Michael instructed as he turned to the official. Okay, The official nodded, turned around, and walked out quickly. If it weren't for the fact that Meg appeared today and saved that mother and daughter, things like this would have been repeated over and over again. Similar things could be happening in many places in Chaos City every day. As expected, it's not that easy to make this world a better place. Just Chaos City alone is enough to create such a problem. Looks like I have to do a lot more if I want to promote this concept to the entire Norland continent. Michael made his way over to the window, and a contemplative look appeared on his face as he looked at the tall and straight poplar tree outside. Come to think of it, I really do have to thank him for this. At the very least, he gave the City Lord's castle a chance to resolve this issue before more people were harmed. Michael thought back to the young man who had rejected him after hearing that he was the City Lord. He really was an interesting person. After Sally and Yabamiya finished cleaning up the restaurant, they both said that they had to go back to work and that they would be back on time before the restaurant opened for business. As for the overtime pay, Meg didn't force them. He would just give them the full amount at the end of the month. In any case, this money had already been included in the City Lord's castle's reservation fee. System: update the menu. Add ice cream to the menu. Sell it for 200 copper coins each, and there are 4 flavors to choose from. Also, rearrange the dishes on the menu. Single dishes, side dishes, desserts, drinks. Differentiate them according to their characteristics, Meg said internally as he pulled out a chair and sat down. Let me remind you once again that this system is a proper god of cookery cultivation system. It's already very considerate of me to help you add new dishes to the menu. Rearranging the dishes is too much work, so I won't do it. The system's stern voice sounded with an unquestionable tone. Tisk, TSK. Tell me, how much do you want this time? 10 copper coins? 100 copper coins? Or are you going to ask for 1,000 copper coins? Meg pursed his lips in a joking manner. Please don't use money to humiliate me. Is this the kind of system I am? I'm telling you now, I don't want 1,000 copper coins from you. Only 998 copper coins. Only 998 copper coins. Take home the menu rearrangement package. The system's impassioned voice sounded as if there was a 3D surround sound system roaring at Meg. System, turn off your lousy sound system. I'm going deaf. Meg frowned. The system's performance had never disappointed him. It was impossible for it to have integrity. Host, this is my newly developed 5D surround sound system. It has an all-around sound system, and the receiver can enjoy the best sound quality. The system blabbered on unhappily. Let me understand the menu rearrangement package. Meg interrupted the system and asked calmly. The system was silent for a while before it continued. Host, please don't interrupt the system next time. This will cause confusion in my speech structure. Also, this is a very respectful behavior. Chapter 416. Of course, it's not a problem to interrupt when appropriate. It's beneficial to improve the harmonious relationship between us. The system said in all seriousness. Speak human language. Meg curled his lips. He wasn't going to fall for it. The menu area modification package includes 1 menu area modification, 5 new dishes for free, and a menu quality lifetime warranty card. This includes but is not limited to the 16 menus that the restaurant currently has. Host can also learn about the menu area modification VIP package. 1. Permanently add new dishes for free. 2. Menu area modification option. 3. Add pictures for each dish. Only 1,998 copper coins. The system quickly replied. Add pictures? Meg's eyes lit up. This was not a bad suggestion. The dishes in the restaurant were very different from the dishes in this world. Just looking at the names of the dishes would make new customers confused. If there were pictures, it would be much more intuitive. It would save a lot of trouble explaining and increase efficiency to a certain extent. System, isn't this 1,998 a little too high? How about a 50% discount? 998 will do. Meg raised his eyebrows. Host, this is already a shocking discount. Vomiting blood, a huge discount. You actually have the heart to bargain with this? The system's voice was somewhat sorrowful. Moreover, its voice became heavier as it said, moreover, Even with a 50% discount, it's still $999. How can it be $998? A copper coin has been erased by you just like that. This is simply too much. I say, no matter what, you're still someone who earns hundreds of thousands a day selling vegetables. Is there a need for you to be so agitated over a copper coin? Meg raised his eyebrows. Sometimes, he still couldn't understand the greed of the system. Do you really think that selling vegetables is so profitable? Host, let me tell you, in this industry, the people who grow vegetables are the ones who suffer the most. The cultivation of seeds doesn't cost money. The construction of high-tech greenhouses doesn't cost money. The net cages don't cost money. The space transportation doesn't cost money. If I sell you 10 peas for 10 copper coins, I can only earn 1 copper coin. And I cultivate these 10 peas, from the cultivation of the seeds, to the planting, to the harvest. It takes several months to complete a round of harvesting. From the harvest, I select the best quality peas and provide them to the restaurant. In order to ensure the freshest quality, I use the extremely expensive spatial teleportation technology to directly teleport the ingredients from the place of origin to the host's refrigerator. Every single copper coin was painstakingly earned by me. Therefore, please do not belittle every single copper coin. This is the hard-earned money of us farmers. The system said righteously. When Meg heard the agitated voice of the system, he almost felt guilty. He felt that he was a profiteer who exploited the farmers. However, after thinking about it carefully, he said with a strange expression, I say, system, although the vegetables were planted by you, the fish, prawns, chickens, and ducks were raised by you. But what kind of farmer are you? You didn't even do anything yourself, and you're complaining here like crazy. I almost believed you. Cough, cough, cough. The system coughed for a while. After a while, it said awkwardly, anyway, the VIP set meal costs 1,998 copper coins. It includes selected pictures, optimized sections, and upgraded menus to become more high-end and classy. It improves the quality of the restaurant and the dining experience of the customers. You only need 1 VIP set meal. 998, not a single copper coin more, Meg said decisively, leaving no room for negotiation. 999. I can't go any lower. The system said through gritted teeth, as if it was making a huge concession. 998. 999. The system still refused to compromise. It said somewhat angrily, Host, you earn millions of copper coins a day by cooking. Is there a need to fight with me for a single copper coin? Also, do you know how much work the VIP set meal requires? The photo shoot and selection, layout, increasing the number of menu pages, everything is taken care of by me. Yet you're biting on a single copper coin and not willing to part with it. This is my hard-earned money. In my previous life, I didn't know how difficult it was to earn money. Now that I'm earning money to support my family, I understand that money can't be spent carelessly. Therefore, 998, not a single copper coin more, Meg said righteously. The system was silent for a while. Then, it sighed and said faintly, Host, you win. 998. Change the menu and bring home the VIP set meal. Very good, system. You can start your performance. A happy smile appeared on Meg's face. Although it was only 1 copper coin less, he felt as if he had earned millions of copper coins. You don't have to be too sad. After tomorrow's business hours, I should be able to gather enough money to buy a second set of strength points. Tomorrow, I'll upgrade the restaurant. Meg comforted in his heart. Host, you've made a wise choice. The system's voice suddenly became lively again. So, are you planning to give me a menu change set meal? Meg asked with a smile. Ding. 998 copper coins have been successfully deducted. The menu change VIP set meal has been delivered. No returns. The system's voice immediately sounded. Meg shook his head helplessly. This system was really obsessed with money. He looked at the menu templates that appeared in his mind. After flipping through all of them, he chose the simplest one. It was a small picture with a dish name and price, without any special effects or descriptions. Ding. Menu template selected successfully. Menu customization in progress. The goods will be delivered in 5 minutes. The system's voice sounded. Okay. Meg nodded. He stood up and began to wonder where the meeting would be tonight. Ideally, a round-table meeting would be more impressive. However, the system's rental price of 10,000 copper coins made Meg lose interest. The high cost went against his philosophy of making money. After standing in the middle of the restaurant and thinking for a while, Meg arranged the tables into 5 groups with a distance of about 2 meters. He also arranged a table at the front for the host of the meeting. The simple and practical arrangement ensured that each participant had a table. Sitting opposite each other was also very suitable for the meeting. The 2-meter distance allowed each participant to have some space to think calmly. The other tables and chairs were moved to the corner by Meg. Overall, the restaurant still looked very spacious and comfortable. There shouldn't be any problems like this. Hopefully, their meeting will be more elegant and won't cause any damage to the restaurant. Meg clapped his hands and thought worriedly in his heart. A giant dragon on one side and a demon on the other. Neither of them was a kind race. If they fought because of a disagreement, the restaurant would not be able to withstand their torment. After setting up the table, Meg went into the kitchen and began to prepare the ingredients for the meeting. Michael was not a city lord who did as he pleased. The reason he chose Mamie's as the meeting location and agreed to so many conditions was definitely not because his grilled fish could alleviate his daughter's illness. It was because he thought that Mamie's could promote this meeting, and all that Mamie's had was delicious food. Meg was very clear about this. Chapter 417. This is the place, right? The golden dragon's golden eyes fell on Mamie's, which was situated at the very corner of the plaza. He folded his massive wings, and golden light flashed as he transformed into a burly man in golden armor. He plummeted from over 100 meters into the air like a javelin, crashing heavily into the entrance of Mamie's restaurant. Bam! A muffled thump erupted as the ground tremored violently. A massive crater half a meter deep appeared in the ground in front of the restaurant, and smoke and dust rose into the air as if it had been struck by a bomb. The newly constructed Mabai building next to the restaurant tremored violently, as if it were going to collapse at any moment. All of the passers-by looked on with shock in their eyes, wondering why this giant dragon had descended from the sky. Could it be that the restaurant in the corner had angered him? What's that? In the kitchen, Meg also turned toward the entrance of the restaurant with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Even though the tremors in the restaurant weren't very strong, he was still quite curious about who had arrived. Is someone here to cause trouble? Didn't the city lord's castle book the entire restaurant today? Yabamiya looked outside with a surprised expression. There was a cloud of dust outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, so he couldn't see what had fallen. It's a giant dragon, a very powerful giant dragon, Sally said in a soft voice. She could sense the giant dragon's aura, and it was at least a 9th-tier giant dragon. It was most likely here to attend the conference today. Mamie's, this is the place. Why did Chaos City choose such a small restaurant? Are they looking down on us giant dragons? A tall and burly man in golden armor strode out of the crater. He appeared to be in his 40s and had a square face. Even his eyebrows were rectangular, and his golden buzz cut shimmered under the setting sun as if it had been forged from pure gold. Tisk, Jinx, when are you going to learn how to appear like a gentleman? Right at this moment, a cold voice rang out, and a huge black bat slowly glided over. It folded its wings, and a figure landed at the entrance of the restaurant. It looked at the golden-armored man with a resigned expression and said, "I'm only here for a meeting today. You're showing up like a low-grade magic beast, and it doesn't show how powerful you are at all." The man was wearing a black robe with a long black cloak behind him. He was tall and looked to be in his 30s. He had a high-nose bridge and a pair of sapphire blue eyes. His shiny hair was neatly combed back, and his hands were behind his back. He stood upright, looking rather gentlemanly. However, his face was pale without a trace of blood, and when he grinned, 2 small sharp fangs could be seen. "Dracula, Big Bat, you're still as annoying as ever. Do you want to have a taste of my fist today?" Jinx looked at the pale young man and clenched his fists as he took a step forward, and the crisp sound of his knuckles cracking could be heard. Dracula shook his head apologetically as he looked at Jinx and said, "The blood of the golden dragon reeks of money. I really can't bring myself to taste your fist. Otherwise, as a gentleman, I would feel bad if I couldn't suck your blood dry since you requested it." Dracula shook his head apologetically. "You sure talk big. Vampires may be one of the 10 major demon races, but there hasn't been any powerful 10th-tier demon patriarchs in recent years, right?" The lava demon also slowly disappeared in the same way. "Who's next?" Right at this moment, a cold voice sounded. A large snowflake appeared on the ground, and a figure in a silver cape silently appeared, looking at Dracula with a cold expression. "Fuck you, Fox. You dared to attack me last time. I'm going to kick you in the balls today." A somewhat violent voice sounded, and a fat figure shot out from a black beast not far away. It flew over like a black iron ball and smashed towards Fox, who had just appeared. "Heh, this sure is lively. Should I join in as well? But if I destroy City Lord Michael's Aiden Square, he'll probably jump up and beat me up, right?" Another flaming dragon that was over 100 meters in length appeared in the air, and it looked down at everyone down below with an intrigued expression. "Long time no see, have it. I didn't think you'd be one of the representatives of the giant dragon race." The space warped, and a spider-like demon with a humanoid body and 8 long black legs appeared. It looked at the flaming dragon with a hint of surprise in its eyes. "What, Gustav? Do you want to fight me again this time? If you weren't always using your spatial magic to escape, I wouldn't mind fighting you." Havid looked at the demon that was over 10 meters tall, and its sharp spider legs were also over 10 meters in length. Battle intent welled up in his red eyes, and it was clear that he was going to charge forward and engage in battle. "I'm not here to fight you. If you want to fight, you'll have plenty of opportunities to do so after this negotiation concludes." Gustav shook his head as he looked down at the giant ball flying toward Fox with a disdainful look on his face. That Tauros guy really isn't that smart. But then again, there aren't many smart beings in the abyssal race either. Looks like I didn't teach you a lesson last time. Seeing as you attacked first, you're going to have to face my wrath." Fox raised his head and looked at the black sphere that was flying towards him. Sharp spikes had already appeared on the surface of the sphere. Each spike was more than a meter long, and it was spinning rapidly as it flew towards him like a sea urchin. "True power of ice domain." Fox raised a hand as he spoke in a cold voice. A burst of bright silver light appeared over his hand, and a square of frozen space appeared before him. The surface of the frozen space quickly froze over, trapping the black ball within. The black ball revolved violently within the frozen space, emitting a piercing screeching sound. The frozen space tremored violently, but it showed no signs of being damaged. "You little bastard! Let me out if you dare." Tauro's enraged voice rang out from within the frozen space. "You're like a coward. Just stay in that block of ice. I don't need you for today's negotiation anyway." Fox chuckled coldly as he continued to control his frost domain. Ding! Chapter 418. All of the giant dragons and demons fell silent for a split second, and all of them turned to look at Amy with a hint of surprise and befuddlement. Why would a little half-elf girl appear in this conference venue? Even Tauros and Fox, who were still in the midst of their battle, had temporarily stopped. "You can continue, but don't worry about me. I just woke up, and I'm just here to watch the show. I've never seen a battle between a giant dragon and a demon before." Amy hurriedly waved her hands at the sight of everyone who had suddenly stopped fighting. She then entered the restaurant and quickly pulled out a small stool. She sat down with Ugly Duckling in her arms and looked on with anticipation in her eyes. "Meow, meow." Ugly Duckling let out a few cries and extended its little paws as if it were demonstrating its might. It wasn't fearful in the slightest. Everyone's eyes widened. They didn't think that a little girl and a kitten would be able to watch the show. Not only were they not fearful in the slightest, they were even asking them to continue. The aggressive Tauros and Fox suddenly lost all desire to continue this duel. The domain of ice and frost shattered, and the spiked orb flew back, transforming into a stout middle-aged man in a suit of black spiked armor. He was also wielding a massive black axe that was as tall as a grown man. The flaming dragon folded its wings and fell from the sky like a meteor. After falling, it turned into a tall and thin flaming man. His face was also fiery red, and his eyes were dancing with fire. There were also flames dancing on his body. The half-human, half-spider spatial demon also appeared on the ground, transforming into a bald dwarf that was half as tall as a grown man. He hovered half a meter in the air, and his clothes were so long that they almost touched the ground, creating a rather peculiar sight to behold. The 3 giant dragons and 3 demons stood facing one another on either side of the restaurant, glaring at each other with hostility in their eyes. However, neither of them displayed any intention to attack, and a peculiar silence ensued. Amy watched with interest for a while, but both sides just stood there without moving. They didn't fight or argue. After waiting for a while, she couldn't help but ask softly, "I say, are you guys still going to fight? If not, I'm going to go eat." "Little girl, you're so cute." Dracula turned to look at Amy and couldn't help but smile, revealing a pair of sharp fangs. "Uncle Bat, you're very cute too, especially those sharp teeth. Are they for eating meat?" Amy looked at Dracula with a serious expression. Dracula was stunned when he saw the serious expression on Amy's little face. Usually, children of other races would cry when they saw his sharp teeth. He did not expect this little girl to say that his teeth were cute. Although the nickname Uncle Bat was a little strange, why did it sound so nice coming from her? "This isn't for eating meat, it's for sucking blood. It's the symbol of the vampire's glory. It only takes me 1 second to suck all the blood out of a human." Dracula grinned. He didn't believe that there was a child in this world who wasn't afraid of him. "He's that awesome?" Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at Dracula with admiration. "Great, great. Little girl, aren't you afraid of me? I can suck human blood." Dracula glared at her. This little girl's brain circuit was a little different from the average child's. "Mosquitoes can suck blood too, but I'm not afraid of them at all. I just have to raise my hand and pat them lightly, and they'll die. I'm not afraid of them at all." Amy looked at Dracula with a serious expression and shook her head. "What? You're comparing me to a lowly mosquito that can't even be considered a magic beast? I'm a noble vampire." Dracula glared at Amy with an expression of disbelief, but his gentlemanly demeanor allowed him to continue to control his emotions. "Then is Uncle Bat a large mosquito that was transformed from a mosquito?" Amy continued to ask curiously. "PFFF." Dracula threw up a mouthful of blood. "Uncle Bat, are you all right? Why don't you suck all this blood back? Otherwise, wouldn't we have eaten lunch for nothing?" Amy looked at the puddle of blood in front of Dracula with a concerned expression. "PFFF." Dracula couldn't help but throw up another mouthful of blood. "All right, it doesn't matter. You won't die from throwing up blood anyway." Amy looked at Dracula with a comforting smile and said, "Besides, even though our restaurant doesn't sell blood, Father can make a lot of delicious food. It's definitely better than fresh blood. As a noble vampire, I definitely won't eat human food." Dracula calmed himself down slightly and looked at Amy with a proud expression. "That's a pity. I thought only idiots wouldn't want to eat Father's food." Amy shrugged with a look of pity. Dracula felt his chest churn, and he felt the urge to throw up blood again. If it weren't for Amy's sincere expression of pity, he would definitely have thought that she was scolding him. Even though it sounded more or less the same now, there was no reason for him to flare up. "It's really difficult to be a gentleman." Dracula looked up at the sky and thought to himself with a resigned expression. He suddenly had the urge to beat someone up. "Ha ha ha, little girl, you're so funny. You're such a cute little girl." Jinx looked at Amy and laughed heartily. He was always at a disadvantage when arguing with Dracula. Now that he was being scolded by a little girl to the point of vomiting blood, he felt really good. "Thank you, Uncle Jinx. Is your hair really made of gold? Why are all of them standing up like porcupines? Are you worried that someone will rob your hair if you go out on the streets like this?" Amy turned to Jinx with a curious look on her face. "Air." The smile on Jinx's face stiffened. These questions were really sharp. He suddenly understood why Dracula was throwing up blood. This little girl was really not simple. Uncle Eight-Legged Spider, why are your clothes so long? Actually, they look even shorter like this. Uncle Hedgehog, that pig of yours was stomped into the ground by you, and it hasn't climbed back up yet. Don't play such a dangerous game next time. Look at how pitiful it is. Don't you know how heavy you are? Uncle Snowman, your magic was so cool, but it still pales in comparison to my master's. Uncle Fireman, did you eat chili before coming here? Why can't the fire on your body be extinguished? If that's the case, you can't enter the restaurant. Amy commented on everyone one by one, and her little face was filled with joy from making new friends. Chapter 419. The little guy didn't seem to have any ill intentions, but his words made people want to beat him up, especially when Fox was already gathering silver frost magic in his hand. He looked at Amy coldly, as if he was going to attack at any moment. Ahem, I'm sorry. If Amy has offended you, I hope you can forgive her. Meg quickly walked out of the restaurant and stood in front of Amy. He didn't expect Amy to be so direct and mean. However, these were the big shots who represented the dragons and demons in the negotiation, so it wouldn't be good to offend them. After all, they still had to hold the meeting at the restaurant tonight. So, are you going to take my attack for her? Or do you want me to see that so-called master of hers who is much more powerful than me? Fox glared at Mag with a cold expression, and a burst of frost rose up from beneath his feet. It transformed into an ice crystal dragon that was as thick as a water bucket and pounced toward Mag. Fox, don't you think you're going a little overboard? A little girl's words carry no harm. It's not very gentlemanly of you to take them seriously. Dracula pursed his lips at Fox. He glanced at the giant ice crystal dragon, and a black staff appeared in his hand. It seemed like he was about to attack. Mag's eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Fox and the oncoming ice dragon. He didn't think that this guy would suddenly attack. At the very least, a ninth-tier being wasn't something that he could defend himself against. He shielded Amy with one hand as he racked his brains for a way to escape. However, if it weren't for the city lord or Urian, it would be virtually impossible for him to evade this attack. Be careful. In the restaurant, Sally also let out a soft cry. She waved her hand, and 2 pillars of water shot out from her hand toward the giant ice crystal dragon. Boss, Amy. Yabamiya also ran toward the restaurant door anxiously. Overboard? Heh, how can the dignity of the frost dragon race be blasphemed by others? Besides, you're a half-elf, a useless and lowly hybrid race. It was a mistake to come to this world. Fox looked at Meg and Amy behind Meg with a mocking expression on his face. Wrong. Yabamiya, who had just run to the door, stood still as if she had been struck by lightning when she heard Fox's words. She had heard the same words many times, but this time, it came from the mouth of a giant dragon. The impact on her was on a completely different level. It was as if something in her heart had suddenly shattered. Fox, you're going overboard with your words. We golden dragons have never thought that mixed blood races are inferior to humans. Rankster is a mixed blood between the golden dragon tribe and your frost tribe. Didn't he still become your chief? Jinx said with a displeased frown. Fox ignored Jinx as he continued to stare at Meg. Although it would be a little troublesome to kill someone in Chaos City, he had already found a reason to do so, so it shouldn't be a big problem. With his status, Chaos City most likely wouldn't fall out with him. Sally's 2 pillars of water crashed into the frost dragon first. A dull thump erupted, and the frost dragon continued to charge toward Meg with unstoppable force. It was completely unimpeded as it charged toward Meg with its mouth wide open. Dracula took a glance at Fox before raising his staff, upon which a black magic light appeared. However, at such a close distance, he couldn't guarantee that the father and daughter duo would be unscathed, so he could only do his best. Right at that moment, a hoarse voice suddenly sounded beside everyone's ears like a clap of thunder. Who gave my disciple the right to teach her a lesson? The temperature abruptly plummeted, and the flames on Havid's body were instantly snuffed out. He even shuddered. Meanwhile, the frost dragon that was charging toward Meg abruptly stopped less than a meter away from Meg. It was as if it had been immobilized by an invisible force. Urian, how is this possible? Fox's eyes widened with incredulity as he stared at Julian, who had just emerged from a nearby magic potion shop. Bam! The frost dragon exploded into shards of ice, and Julian appeared in front of Meg in the blink of an eye. Fox, it's been a few years since we last met, but you still haven't improved at all. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Fox, and he said in a cold and hoarse voice, "Tell me, is my disciple right? Is the disparity between us very small or very large?" All of the giant dragons and demons stared at Julian with shock and wariness in their eyes. This was the 10th tier magic caster, Julian, the Lord of Ice. In this world, powerful beings with nothing to lose were the most terrifying. Coincidentally, Urian, who had no ties in this world, was one of them. The other was Crassus, who had fought with him for his entire life. These two were known as the two great magic casters who couldn't be messed with in the magic world because they were fearless. It was said that the two of them had just accepted the same disciple, and Julian had just said that this little half-elf girl was his disciple, which meant that this little girl was also Crassus' disciple. An icy aura enveloped everyone present, and the chill seeped into their bones, making them not dare to act rashly. Even though there was only a first-tier difference between them, they had to admit that they could feel the aura of death in that instant. This was the difference between a top 10th tier magic caster and a 9th tier magic caster. Even if they were standing right next to a long-range magic caster, they couldn't be sure that they could kill him before he attacked. Fox's face was a little pale. He had heard that Julian was in Chaos City, and that he had accepted a disciple, but the conflict between the dragons and demons had taken up almost all of his attention. On the other hand, he had also been paying attention to Elizabeth's movements, so he didn't know where Julian lived or who his disciple was. However, he didn't think that his disciple would be a half-elf. One had to realize that half-elves had very poor aptitude, and Julian and Crassus were the most picky of all magic casters. Meg looked at the stooped Julian and heaved an internal sigh of relief. At the same time, he slowly clenched his fists. As expected, he had to improve his power as soon as possible. That way, he wouldn't have to wait for others to protect him the next time he stood in front of Amy. "Master Turtle, this Uncle Yeti is a bad guy. He's going to beat up Amy." Amy came out from behind Meg and pointed at Fox. Chapter 420. You don't mind? Heh, I didn't promise to. Julian grinned, and the temperature dropped a little. Frost began to appear on the ground, as if it had entered a harsh winter. "Julian, today's matter is just a misunderstanding. I respect you for being acquainted with my brother back then, and for being an old acquaintance of the Frost Dragon race, so I hope you can let bygones be bygones. Today, I am representing the Dragon race to participate in the negotiation between the Dragon race and the Demon race. I hope you can understand this matter." Fox's expression was still calm, but his hands under his wide sleeves were trembling a little. His eyes were full of vigilance, and his back was slightly arched as if he was ready to attack at any time. Dracula and the others instinctively took a couple of steps back, and were also looking at Urian warily. They knew more about the legends of this Lord of Ice, and knew that those so-called legends weren't just baseless rumors. He had once slaughtered the man-eating demons alone, and hunted them down all over the continent until they were exterminated. Until now, no man-eating demons had appeared there. The strength of the man-eating demons back then was very close to the strength of the top 10 demon races. Because of one person, the entire race was exterminated. One could imagine how powerful he was. Of course, there was also a saying that the Crassus had participated in that massacre. It was just that the man-eating demons were all dead, and Julian had never mentioned this in front of others, so no one knew the truth. However, one thing was for sure. These two were not kind old grandpas. When it came to killing, they were more ruthless than anyone else. As for Fox, even the Frost Dragon King Rankster had to admit that Julian's ice magic was above his. If it were Fox, he would not even have the ability to fight back. However, Fox was indeed representing the dragon race to participate in the negotiation with the demons today. But would Julian care about his identity? Everyone thought to themselves as they looked at Julian. Julian, who used to be carefree, now had a disciple, which meant that he had concerns and weaknesses. Angering the dragon race was not a wise choice. What's wrong with the dragon race? Are they going to find a bunch of old men to fight me because of you? Julian looked at Fox with a mocking smile. Then, he raised his hand and slapped him to the ground. He then patted his face with the back of his hand and continued, Rankster was much more obedient than you when he saw me back then because that guy was afraid of pain. I hit him once, and he remembered it. He knew to hide when he saw me, and when he couldn't hide, he knew to admit defeat. Why is your skin even thicker than his? Fox's body was stiff as he lay on the ground. He was in a daze. The moment Julian raised his hand, countless countermeasures flashed through his mind. But before he could execute them, his whole body seemed to be frozen. He couldn't move at all. This was a barrier that was more advanced and solid than his frost domain. In this space, he felt like a completely defenseless baby that could only be slaughtered. Master Julian is so awesome. Amy clapped her little hands together as she exclaimed. That ice crystal dragon was so powerful, but Julian's subordinate had been defeated in an instant, and he didn't even have a chance to retaliate. Her master was far too powerful. What powerful magic control! What is beyond the 10th tier? This is definitely not the power that a 10th tier magic caster should possess. Fox is close to the 10th tier as well. Havid took a couple of steps backward, and the flames that had been snuffed out began to reignite once again. Even my spatial magic can't break free from a magic barrier like this. No wonder those old monsters warned me not to mess with Julian and Crassus. Those two old monsters are far more powerful than normal great magic casters. No wonder none of the ogre tribe survived. Gustav was also looking at Julian with a wary expression, and he reflexively took a few more steps back in an attempt to distance himself from him. As expected, I have to be a gentleman, especially when it comes to adorable girls. Dracula put away his black cane as he nodded to himself. In this world, power is the key to living a more comfortable life. The foundation of freedom comes from great power, and that can be a powerful tool to set more people free. Meg looked at Julian's departing figure as he thought to himself. There were many things that he wanted to do, and that wasn't just running a restaurant. Great power would be a great help to him. Fox's heart was already filled with rage after being slapped to the ground and slapped in the face. However, he was being completely suppressed, and it was impossible for him to even move a finger. At the same time, he was also feeling a little fearful and furious as he glared at Julian with wide eyes. I, Julian, only have one disciple in my entire life. If anyone dares to bully her, then they will be bullying me. All of the people who have bullied me in my life are dead. Julian spoke slowly as if he was talking about something very ordinary. His voice was so hoarse that it sounded like a demon that had just crawled out of hell. There wasn't the slightest bit of emotion in his voice. An ice blade slowly condensed in Julian's hand. The crystal-clear ice blade was as thin as a cicada's wing. This was his extremely famous ice blade of death. Julian would only use this blade to cut off the heads of his enemies. In the past 100 years, less than 10 people had died under this blade. It wasn't because Julian hadn't killed many people, but because ordinary people didn't have the right to make him use this blade. He didn't expect to meet Fox today. It seemed like Julian really wanted to kill someone. Meg looked at the ice blade in Julian's hand and didn't say anything to stop him. If he was the one holding the blade now, he wouldn't hesitate to stab it into Fox's throat because this guy had just tried to kill him and his daughter. Meg knew this very well. What's this? However, a hint of concern appeared in Sally's eyes as she knew that if Urian were to kill Fox here, it would be a massive slap to the face to the entire dragon race. There was no way that the dragon race would let this matter rest. No matter how powerful Julian was, the Crassus would definitely step in to protect Amy. In the face of the dragon race, which had the most powerful beings, no one could challenge their most important dignity on their own. Julian, Master, this is just a misunderstanding. I actually only wanted to scare her. I didn't want to kill her at all. I'm not stupid. How could I kill someone in Chaos City? Fox was a little stunned by the slap, but he wasn't stupid. He looked at the ice blade of death, and could already sense the strong killing intent emanating from it. He thought back to all the things he had heard about Julian in the past, and his voice trembled slightly. "Do you think I look stupid?" Julian furrowed his brows, and then slashed down with the ice blade in his hand. "Spare the dragon." Chapter 421. An arrow flew through the air, piercing through the ice barrier and striking the ice blade of death with unerring accuracy. The ice blade and the arrow shattered almost at the same time, and shards of wood and ice fell to the ground. Fox's heart was already in his throat, and he yelled in a panicked voice, "City Lord, save me!" "Michael?" Julian looked up at the black horse-drawn carriage approaching from afar. There was a tall and broad figure standing on the shaft of the horse-drawn carriage. It was none other than the City Lord of Chaos City, Michael. He put down the black longbow in his hand and said to Julian, "Julian, I don't know what happened, but I hope you can calm down first. Don't kill anyone in Chaos City, especially someone sent by the dragon race to attend the conference." Fox heaved a sigh of relief. In Chaos City, Michael's words were more important than anyone else's. "Is he the City Lord? Isn't he the friend of the owner who came to the restaurant a few nights ago?" Yabamiya looked at Meg with a shocked expression. She didn't think that Meg would be friends with the City Lord. That was something that she didn't even dare to imagine. "Michael, do you think you can stop me if I want to kill someone?" Julian asked with a smile as he looked at Michael. "Apart from Novin, no one can stop you within 3 meters of you." Michael shook his head and gestured for the horse-drawn carriage to stop. "No, even Novin won't be able to stop you within 3 meters. Julian looked at Michael with a confident smile and said, "This is my absolute domain. I can kill anyone I want. No one can be faster than me." Fox, who had just heaved a sigh of relief, became flustered again. A chill ran down his spine. If even City Lord Michael couldn't save him, then wouldn't his life be in the hands of Julian? That feeling struck him with fear, and he suddenly regretted attacking a little girl. If he had held back a little, then things wouldn't have turned out this way. Michael stared at Julian for a long while before sighing. "Novin might not make it in time, but if Alex is still alive, he might be faster than you. He's already dead, isn't he?" Julian's expression darkened. He sighed and said, "What a pity." "Yes, it's a pity." Michael nodded with a regretful expression. Upon hearing Alex's name, complex expressions appeared on the faces of the dragons and demons. "Actually, he's dead, but he's still alive." Meg looked at the regretful faces of the two and felt as if something was stuck in his throat. He had to spit it out, but he could only hold it in. However, hearing the two of them elevate Meg Alex's status so high, he felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. So Meg Alex was so powerful when he was at his peak. He could actually be faster than Julian when he was in his absolute domain? So, whether I kill him or not, it's still up to me, right? Julian restrained his expression and looked at Michael with a hoarse voice.
"Yes."
Michael nodded. He glanced at the pale-faced fox lying on the ground and then looked at Julian. He shook his head and said, "But I know you won't kill him, at least not today." "Why?" Julian looked at Michael with interest. "If you want to kill him, my arrow just now can penetrate your domain, but it won't stop you from killing him." Michael smiled and glanced at Amy, who was standing at the side. He continued, "Besides, it's not a good thing to kill someone in front of a child, is it?" "No, since we're living in this world, killing people is something we have to do sooner or later. So, I'm not worried about what my disciple will do when she sees me kill someone, because she may be better at it than me in the future. Her character of abhorrence of evil has already determined her future path. I believe she'll do better than me." Julian shook his head. He clenched his fist, and a sharp icicle more than a meter long appeared in his hand. Then, he suddenly stabbed it toward Fox's eyes. "No!" Fox screamed. He looked at the rapidly falling icicle and closed his eyes. Michael narrowed his eyes slightly, but did not make another move. Meg reached out and covered Amy's eyes. Julian didn't care, but he did. Even if Amy would punish evil in the future, that was a matter for the future. She was still a child, and shouldn't be affected by these things. The icicle fell, but it didn't fall on Fox's eyes. Instead, it fell on his right hand. The sharp icicle pierced through his palm and nailed his hand to the ground. Ah! Fox screamed in agony. His whole body was trembling. Julian withdrew his hand from the icicle and looked into Fox's eyes. He said seriously, "I didn't kill you not because I don't dare to. If I want to kill you, no one can stop me. If you have any malicious intent toward Amy in the future, the frost dragon will be gone." Yes, yes. The pale-faced fox nodded. He couldn't hide the panic on his face. In that instant, he felt the shadow of death looming over him. The icicle that was aimed at his eyes seemed to have changed its mind at the last moment and pierced his hand instead. Otherwise, he would already be dead. As such, he knew that Julian was serious. Furthermore, he wasn't saying that he would be gone. Instead, he was saying that the frost dragon would be gone. Julian had always been very good at eradicating species. At the very least, there was no one on the Norland continent who was better at eradicating species than him. Even though the frost dragon tribe was very powerful, it was definitely not a good thing to anger a great magic caster who was well past his prime. Furthermore, he was a renowned lunatic. A deep sense of horror welled up in Fox's heart. He didn't think that the entire frost dragon tribe would be threatened because of a little half-elf girl. This restaurant is very dangerous. We can't afford to mess with it. All of the demons and giant dragons also took meaningful glances at Meg and his daughter. Even though they also had top-tier 10th-tier beings in their tribe, if Julian were to drag the Crassus down with him, then the tragedy of the ogres could happen again. They didn't have to worry about anyone else, but they had to warn their juniors not to mess with half-elves in the future. Master Julian is so powerful. Yabamiya stared at Julian with astonishment in her eyes. Even a powerful giant dragon like her was completely powerless in the face of this man. Master Julian is known as the #1 magic caster who shouldn't be messed with. He's still as intimidating as ever. With his words, there shouldn't be too many people coming to the restaurant to cause trouble. Chapter 422. Okay, Amy will remember this. When Amy grows up, I'll defeat this bad guy myself. Amy nodded seriously at Julian. Was it arrogance? No, it was confidence. Both master and disciple were equally confident. All of the demons and giant dragons looked at Amy, and an indescribable feeling welled up in their hearts. This little half-elf girl who appeared to be only 3 or 4 years old was most likely going to become a dazzling new star in the near future. Someone who could be chosen as a disciple by both Julian and Crassus, and a genius who could make them compromise with each other, could definitely not be mediocre. Fox gritted his teeth and endured the pain. He did not dare to look at Amy and Julian, for fear that he would lose control of his emotions. Many years ago, when he first met Julian, his powerful ice magic had left a shadow in his heart. As his strength continued to increase, he thought that the gap between them was not that big. It was only when he was slapped to the ground that he came to his senses. "You're still my lord." Julian's title of #1 ice magic was not self-proclaimed, but publicly acknowledged. Julian and Crassus will die, and when that time comes, this little guy will definitely not be able to grow to the point where he can threaten me. Fox lowered his head, and a hint of viciousness flashed across his eyes. When that time comes, I'll make sure that father and daughter die a horrible death. Julian, do you want to come to this meeting? Michael handed the longbow in his hand to the coachman beside him and jumped down from the carriage. He looked at Michael with a smile. Do you think I'm a demon or a dragon? Julian looked at Michael and asked him in return. You're still as humorous as ever. All right, I'll look for you to have a drink together next time, Michael said with a smile. Since you're treating, I'll come, Julian said expressionlessly, and then turned to walk in the direction of the magic potion shop. The cold air that shrouded the restaurant's entrance disappeared in an instant, and the dragons and demons secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They had seen many 10th-tier powerhouses before, but this was the first time they had seen such a stifling atmosphere. Mr. Mack, I'm sorry to have startled you. The City Lord's castle did not come over in advance and caused this conflict Michael said apologetically to Meg. It's all right. I just hope that the city lord will screen the customers before booking the restaurant next time. We don't serve some customers, Meg said with a slight nod. He did not appear too angry, but he did not deliberately try to be nonchalant. After what happened in the slums this morning, the city lord's castle would definitely need a lot of manpower. Michael was probably very busy, so he could understand why the city lord's castle didn't send someone over earlier. Something like this won't happen again. Michael nodded before turning to Fox, who had just gotten up from the ground and pulled out the icicle in his hand. His expression darkened slightly as he said, Fox, you're here to negotiate as a representative of the dragon race, so I won't expel you. However, I'm warning you that you have to abide by Chaos City's rules. The safety of Chaos City's residents is paramount. If something like this happens again, the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple definitely won't let you off. Fox's expression darkened slightly, but he still lowered his head at the sight of Michael's stern expression. He suppressed his voice and said, I understand. Michael's expression eased slightly as he looked at Fox's bleeding hand and said, If your injuries are severe, you don't have to attend today's meeting. There's no need for that. I can attend this meeting. Fox shook his head. He gently stroked the wound on his right hand with his left hand, and the gaping wound on his right hand was immediately covered in ice. It was as if he had put on a pair of ice gloves, and the bleeding immediately stopped. However, everyone present knew that Fox's injuries were definitely not as simple as just a gaping wound on his hand. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen to use ice to temporarily stop the bleeding instead of relying on the powerful regenerative abilities of the dragon race to heal the wound. Michael glanced at Fox's hand before turning to Meg with a smile and asked, Mr. Mack, can we enter now? Please come in. Meg opened the restaurant's door with Amy's hand in his and nodded with a smile. Even though he didn't have a good impression of Fox, as the owner of a restaurant, it clearly wasn't appropriate for him to cause trouble during the meeting. Meg still had a discerning eye. A few horse-drawn carriages with the city lord's castle insignia arrived not far away, and a few officials carrying piles of documents quickly strode toward the restaurant's entrance. The restaurant isn't very big, but it's very exquisite. I'm curious as to why Michael would choose this place as the venue for the meeting. Dracula was the first to walk into the restaurant. Welcome. Yabamiya smiled. After hearing Jinx's words, her mood had improved again. So there were still dragons who didn't look down on half-breeds. If only her father was a golden dragon as well. Sally nodded in response. Even though she didn't like bloodthirsty vampires, she still had a good impression of this well-mannered vampire who was about to step in to help Meg and Amy. Dracula's eyes lit up at the sight of the two of them, and he bowed with a smile. Hello, beautiful ladies. I finally know why Lord Michael chose to hold the meeting here. Aside from the exquisite restaurant, the most important thing is that there are beautiful and elegant waitresses. After everyone entered the restaurant, Michael turned to Meg with gratitude and said, Mr. Mack, thank you for what you did this morning at the area where the families of the deceased miners lived. You saved many people who were living in misery and also removed a piece of haze from this city. I just happened to see it. We still have to rely on the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple to remove the haze from the city, but I hope that you can give the people living in this haze a chance to breathe. Let them know that the haze isn't actually an impenetrable fortress. As long as they reach out, someone outside the haze will be able to grab their hand and pull them out, Meg said with a serious expression. What do you think, Mr. Mack? Michael turned to Meg with a serious expression. He was very surprised by the words that Brandley had told him about Meg. Meg wasn't just a chef who could say something like that. Chapter 423. Petition Organization? Michael looked at Meg and thought seriously for a while. His eyes became brighter and brighter, and he suddenly grasped Meg's hand and said excitedly, Your idea is really wonderful. I've been thinking about how to supervise the officials today, but as long as it's a hierarchical management method, there are bound to be all kinds of loopholes and gray areas. And the best supervisors are actually the civilians at the lowest level. Yes, if the families of the deceased miners had a place to complain when the compensation was embezzled, then the tragedy wouldn't have happened. Meg nodded and calmly withdrew his hand. Although he didn't know much about politics, he was, after all, a person who had experienced modern society. Some political institutions were still very valuable if they could be used well. Very good, but I have to discuss this matter with Roland first, and then come up with a plan. Michael nodded and looked at Meg and sincerely said, Mr. Mack, if it weren't for your delicious cooking, I really want to pull you into the City Lord's castle as my assistant. You're a very thoughtful and far-sighted person. I still prefer cooking. Meg smiled and shook his head. That's true. The City Lord's castle can't pay Mr. Mack such a high salary. Michael also smiled and walked into the restaurant. Father, did Amy do something wrong? Amy grabbed Meg's hand and looked up at Meg with a puzzled look in her big blue eyes. Amy didn't do anything wrong. It's the world that's wrong. Meg smiled and stroked Amy's hair, then squatted down in front of her and looked at her as he said, However, before you give a nickname to a stranger in the future, you have to see what kind of person they are first. If it's a gentlemanly and kind person, they'll treat it as a kind joke and a friendly nickname. But if it's a person who's easily angered and narrow-minded, they'll treat it as an insult and even use it as a reason to hurt you. Father believes that you do not view this world with malice, but sometimes the world is evil. Amy thought for a while, then nodded seriously and said, Yes, Amy understands. Just like how Big Sister Cece and Big Bear are kind people, and the bad guy just now is a narrow-minded person. From now on, Amy won't give them nice names. Good girl. Amy gave Amy a hug, then held her little hand as they walked into the restaurant. She smiled and said, Let's go. There's going to be an important meeting at our restaurant tonight, so when they're talking, Amy can listen from the side, but don't disturb them. Okay, Amy got it. Amy nodded obediently. In the restaurant, the dragons and demons had already sat opposite each other and looked at each other. The atmosphere gradually became solemn and oppressive. Michael sat down at the head of the table, and a worker from the City Lord's castle was handing out information. Two officials sat at the end of the table, holding pens and paper in their hands. It appeared that they were responsible for recording the meeting's content. There were exactly 10 people in total. Yabamiya poured a glass of water for everyone, then stood near the kitchen with Sally. Meg had already told them about the meeting, and Michael hadn't told them to avoid arousing suspicion anyway, so they could watch from the side when the food wasn't being served. They just had to make sure that they didn't disturb the meeting. As for when the food was going to be served, Michael didn't say anything. However, under normal circumstances, such a serious meeting wouldn't be held while eating, right? Are they going to fight? Amy lay down on the tall stool behind the counter with Ugly Duckling in her arms and looked at everyone in the restaurant with curiosity in her eyes. Meg entered the kitchen and continued to prepare ingredients. Giant dragons and demons most likely all had huge appetites. After all, the entire restaurant had been booked, so he had to provide enough food. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to afford to pay 300,000 copper coins. This restaurant is quite interesting. The demon islands are pretty well drawn. It's almost like a map. Dracula withdrew his gaze from the wallpaper, and a relaxed expression appeared on his face. However, after his gaze fell on the 3 dragons, he curled his lips in disdain and said, How can you dragons be so shameless? After the end of the racial war, the 2 races signed an agreement that the Boundless Sea Realm belongs to the 2 races. Regardless of what is discovered in the Boundless Sea Realm, first come, first serve. This time, your dragon race suddenly attacked our demon race's fleet, leading to the destruction of an entire fleet, which triggered this small-scale war. You dragons have to give us an explanation for this matter. Bullshit. Jinx slammed the table as he glowered and said, You demons were the ones who started this. Even though our dragon race doesn't really care about the areas outside of Dragon Island, that doesn't mean you can approach Dragon Island as you please. Dragon Island is located in the Boundless Sea Realm, and there are over 3,600 islands around it that are all part of our dragon race's territory. That so-called fishing team of yours actually ran to the westernmost island of our dragon race and said that this is your territory. Furthermore, you even seriously injured a blue dragon residing there. You are trying to invade the Dragon Island. You're challenging the dignity of our dragon race. Bullshit. I was there in person. That island is thousands of kilometers away from Dragon Island, so it doesn't belong to Dragon Island anymore. If any random island in the Boundless Sea realm is your territory, then why don't you say that the Demon Islands also belong to Dragon Island? Besides, that blue dragon was the one who started the battle, just like those idiots of your dragon race. They always think that they're going to be able to take down an entire ship of demons, only to be crushed into the ground in the end. If you can't beat them, then go back and call for reinforcements. Next time, wait until our reinforcements arrive. Toros slammed the table as he spoke, and his face was flushed with rage. The table tremored slightly, and 2 cracks appeared on the surface of the table. Isn't it just a battle? Do you think our dragon race is afraid of you? It's just that you're way too slow. We've already returned after the battle, and you've only just arrived to collect their corpses. If you don't want to admit defeat, then why don't we fight right now? Flames erupted from Havid's body, burning 2 massive holes into the table that he was sitting on, and the chair beneath him was also incinerated into a pile of ashes. The atmosphere instantly became very tense, and both sides glared at each other, seemingly ready to attack at any moment. The battle has only just begun, and it's already so intense. Are they going to destroy the restaurant? Meg was a little concerned as he looked on. However, the City Lord's castle had promised that all damaged items in the restaurant would be compensated accordingly, so anything that could be purchased from the system wasn't an issue as long as one had the money. Yabamiya also clenched his fists tightly as he looked on with a pained expression at the sight of the incinerated table. These customers had gone too far. How dare they destroy the table? Chapter 424. All of the demons and giant dragons looked at one another in bewilderment. They didn't think that the normally easygoing Michael would be so blunt today. It wasn't as if there had never been a conflict between the 2 sides of a conference before, and it was a unique feature of conferences on the Norland continent. However, not only had Michael forbidden them from doing so, he was even showing them the rules of this restaurant. Since when did a conference between the dragons and demons have to be conducted according to the rules of a single restaurant? Even though they were feeling very conflicted, they could tell from Michael's expression that he wasn't joking. Furthermore, they were here to negotiate as representatives of the dragons and demons, so if they were kicked out without any discussion, they wouldn't be able to answer to their superiors. Chaos City wasn't as powerful as the major races on the Norland continent, but it was a city that had been founded after the conclusion of the war among species, so it had a special status. Almost no races had ever clashed with Chaos City, so it was a neutral city on the Norland continent. It was exactly because of this that Chaos City was responsible for mediating conflicts between different races. During the past century, countless ceasefire agreements had been signed here, and it had become a common practice. Furthermore, Chaos City definitely wasn't a weak city. During the past century, many powerful beings from different races had gathered here, and they had all agreed that they were residents of Chaos City. They didn't belong to any race, and only fought for Chaos City. As the City Lord, Michael was also extremely powerful. He had already become a 10th tier knight 30 years ago, and his arrow that had pierced through Julian's ice barrier was a testament to his power. He was one of the most powerful beings on the Norland continent, and his status was just as high as that of their chief. In Chaos City, his words represented authority. Let me see what other rules this restaurant has. Dracula was the first to pick up the menu and began to read through it. After a while, he turned to Havid and Toros with a peculiar expression and said, "Looks like you two have to pay for the tables and chairs in this restaurant before you can leave, and you have to pay in cash. As such, demons and giant dragons have to be gentlemanly. I really like the rules of this restaurant. They're teaching you how to be a gentleman, at least when it comes to eating." Everyone else hesitated momentarily upon hearing this before picking up the menus on the table as well. Havid looked at the spark on his hand and hesitated momentarily before snuffing it out before picking up the menu. Fox put down the menu in his hand and asked Michael, "City Lord Michael, we're here for a meeting, not a meal. If we're not even allowed to speak, how are we going to continue?" "Yeah, it's fine if we don't fight, but my voice is just that loud. Also, the chief told me that I have to speak loudly when I came back. It's one thing to talk too much, but I can't lose in terms of presents, Jinx said, scratching his head. Do we really have to pay in cash? But I don't have any cash on me. What am I supposed to do? Havid scratched his head with furrowed brows. That's right. The restaurant only accepts cash. We don't owe anyone anything. Amy nodded as she turned to Havid and said, Uncle Fireman, you can borrow some cash from Uncle Golden Silk over there. If he doesn't have any cash on him, you just have to pluck a few strands of his golden hair, and that should be enough. Havid turned to Jinx's hair upon hearing this, contemplating the feasibility of this idea. Havid, you're not that poor, are you? Don't even think about taking my hair. If you really don't have enough money, I'll lend you some, and you'll pay me double the amount when we get back. Jinx took a step away from the eager Havid as he cautioned in a serious voice. All right, I'll pay you back double when we get back. Havid nodded in tacit agreement. Mia, get a new table and chair for the guests. Meg called out from the kitchen. He didn't think that Michael would be so straightforward and direct. If they didn't have to fight in the restaurant, then they wouldn't have to worry about the restaurant being torn down. After all, the restaurant was already receiving a lot of attention, and if it were to be torn down, it would be very difficult to restore it overnight even if they had the money and the system. Otherwise, it would attract a lot of attention. All right, Mia nodded before bringing over a new table and chair for Havid. Meanwhile, Sally quickly swept away the ashes with a broom. She didn't use the water magic that she was most adept at. Are you worried about being recognized? Meg turned to Sally with a hint of surprise on his face, but he didn't ask any questions. The conference can continue. That's why I'm here today. Chaos City has always maintained an impartial stance, and as a witness and moderator of the conference, we won't participate in the conference, nor will we offer any opinions on the content of the conference. Michael looked at everyone, who had fallen silent again, and spread open his hands as he said, You can continue now? The giant dragon and demon factions looked at one another. There was no way that they were going to fight unless they wanted to forfeit this conference and risk being kicked out by Michael himself. Furthermore, they had indeed come here for the conference. Both sides had sustained heavy losses during the border war, and neither side had won. That small island was currently under the control of the demons, but due to the fact that it had been surrounded by giant dragons, the two sides were locked in a meaningless tug-of-war. Regardless of whether it was the giant dragons or the demons that were constantly being conscripted, this regional war was going to drag on for a very long time. Aside from expending both sides' combat prowess and wealth, there was no point in doing so. However, both sides were already at the height of their powers, and there were many demons and giant dragons involved in the war. Even though they were still restraining themselves from mobilizing their most powerful beings, if this continued, there was no guarantee that they would be able to keep the situation under control. Once 10th-tier beings joined the battle, there was a very good chance that a true interracial war would erupt. The continent, which had just enjoyed a century of peace, was going to experience a baptism of war again. At a time like this, if both sides could retreat without having to embarrass themselves, that would undoubtedly be the best option. This was also why they had come here in the first place. However, negotiation wasn't a simple matter. How could they gain the most benefits from the negotiation table? How could they make their side stand on the moral high ground? Even if they wanted to make the other side take the blame for this conflict, that was all a matter of knowledge. As such, they had to first overwhelm the other side with their imposing manner. It appeared that fighting wasn't going to work at the moment. Otherwise, they would be disqualified, so they could only resort to verbal sparring. Chapter 425. Fox's expression immediately darkened. His frozen right hand was trembling slightly on the table, while his left hand was clenched tightly into a fist. Ha ha ha. Toros and Gustav both burst into raucous laughter, almost burrowing under the table. Jinx and Havid were both trying their best to repress their laughter. One of them was looking up at the chandelier, while the other was looking down at a small black on the table, and both of them were trembling uncontrollably. Pfft. Ha ha ha. I can't hold it in any longer, Fox. I've always wanted to tell you something, but I didn't think your butt would be so white. Ha 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 ha. Havid couldn't help but burst into raucous laughter. Ha ha ha. You saw it too? I saw it too. Ha 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 ha. Jinx also burst into raucous laughter. He had been holding back his laughter for far too long, and tears were flowing from his eyes. Yabamiya slowly turned her head to the side and tried her best not to burst into laughter, but she couldn't help but smile at the thought of Fox being forced to run around naked. Alex, I didn't think that he would be such a person, but he's definitely not a good person. He must have only done that to punish him, right? I wonder if the princess was with him at the time? A hint of surprise and bewilderment flashed through Sally's eyes, as well as a hint of pity. Running around naked? Does that mean running around outside without any clothes on? This bastard is so shameless. Amy glanced at Fox with a look of disdain. Something like that happened? In the kitchen, Meg also faltered slightly upon hearing this. He had no recollection of this, and he didn't know who Fox was, so it appeared that Irina had been with him at the time. Fox took a deep breath to calm himself down, and then looked at Dracula with some mockery. Dracula, don't you vampires claim that you only drink blood and are absolutely not vegetarians? I heard that you were forced to eat grass for 3 days by Princess Irina, and even your hair was dyed green. The smile on Dracula's face stiffened instantly, as if he had recalled something unbearable. His expression gradually became twisted, and a sickly flush appeared on his pale face. Pfft. Ha ha ha, I remember that. It was at the Demon Plaza, and they even sold tickets for 10 silver coins each. At the time, the line was so long that it stretched all the way to the outside of the plaza. I also bought a ticket, and that was the first time I saw a vampire eating grass so deliciously. Toros slapped his thigh and laughed so hard that he was almost out of breath. I saw it too. I even bought a return ticket and specially went home to bring my son to watch it. He was responsible for all the jokes I made that year. Gustav also had an excited expression. Fuck. Are you still teammates? Dracula looked at Toros and Gustav with a pained expression. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten about it. I even flew over to take a look. Vampires are eating grass. It's the first time I've seen something like that in my life. I didn't think that the happy vampire eating grass would be you. Gings looked at Dracula with a shocked expression before chortling again. Yabamiya was also trying very hard not to burst into laughter. Irina? Meg was rather surprised to hear that. However, he couldn't help but burst into laughter when he imagined a vampire being forced to eat grass. That girl really was no ordinary person. Furthermore, she was selling tickets for something like this. Could it be that she was trying to raise money for travel expenses? She had run away from the elven race in the past, so she had to have some ability to earn money to travel across the Norland continent. She deserved full marks for coming up with this idea. Princess Irina. Sally's eyes lit up. She had run away from home just like Irina, and she didn't think that she would hear about her here. She thought to herself, the princess really is awesome. She really did go to the Demon Islands and made a 9th-tier vampire eat grass. But why is she charging fees? Could it be? Sally's eyes widened. Why was she still in Chaos City? Not only was she mesmerized by the food at Mamie's, but she also didn't have much money with her. After leaving the Wind Forest, she realized that it was impossible to do anything on the Norland continent without money. Elves were close to nature, but they couldn't be satisfied just by drinking dew. Furthermore, they had to spend money to stay in the city and buy clothes. The wage of 30 copper coins a day in the inn made her understand that it was not easy to make money. Princess Irina had caught a 9th-tier vampire, forced him to eat grass, and then sold a ticket for 10 silver coins. It was as if a door to a whole new world had been opened for her. So, money can be earned like this. She really is the most powerful Princess Irina. Sally praised Irina from the bottom of her heart. If she were in Irina's shoes, even if she could defeat that vampire, there was no way she would allow him to eat grass and collect money from the side. Uncle Bat, didn't you say you're not a vegetarian? Is that elven princess that nice? She actually fed you grass. Amy looked at Dracula excitedly. Then, like a little adult, she said, you have to be good. You can't be picky. You have to eat a little of everything. This is what Lord Father said. Dracula immediately turned around to look at Amy, and his eyes widened even more as the beautiful elf holding a black leather whip in her hand repeatedly repeated the same sentence over and over again in his mind. You have to be good. You can't be picky. You have to eat a little of everything. That's right. You have to eat a little of everything. That's right. You have to eat more. Even though it had been 5 years, hearing the exact same words again made Dracula have the urge to kneel down. His brain was trembling as he looked at Amy's delicate face, big blue eyes, and delicate pointy ears. In his eyes, the image of her slowly overlapped with that of the demoness. Impossible. It's impossible for them to have children. Dracula shook his head vigorously to deny this thought. He didn't think that after so many years, he would hear the same words from a little girl again. Furthermore, there was such a worried expression on her face, and it was quite irresistible. You win. Dracula gritted his teeth as he glared at Fox. In this first round of clashes, both sides were evenly matched, and it could be said that both sides had suffered heavy losses. Don't laugh, Tauros. I heard that the porcupine battle pigs that you abyssal demons raised in the abyss went on a rampage because of Irina. You led a team to capture her, only to be chased by a herd of porcupine battle pigs for an entire night, right? Jinx chuckled. Jinx, you have the cheek to criticize me? Who was the one who bragged that he was the most powerful being in the world, only to lose to Alex in an arm wrestling match and had to call him Lord Father 3 times? Tauros scoffed. Gustav, are you happy? I heard that someone wanted to peek at the elven princess bathing and was trapped in space by the Tree of Life for an entire year. He was famished by the time he came out. Heh, you have the cheek to criticize me, have it? Weren't you the one who Alex encountered on his first trip to Dragon Island? You were too hot, so he kicked you into the ocean, and you stayed at the bottom of the ocean for 3 days before daring to resurface. Chapter 426. This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting, but it turned into a gathering of scandals and scandals in the blink of an eye. It could be seen that both sides had made ample preparations prior to this meeting. They had even dug up the embarrassing incident of a 3-year-old wetting his bed, and it could be said that they were willing to do anything in order to break each other's resolve. The 2 officials from the city lord's castle were doing their best to repress their laughter, and their faces were already flushed with embarrassment. They had recorded many meetings in the past, but never had they encountered a situation like this. The handwriting on the paper was already a little twisted, and they didn't know if they should record the contents of this meeting. If they did, they would be hunted down and killed. Even Michael wore a peculiar expression upon seeing this, but his excellent self-control prevented him from bursting into laughter as he continued to listen in silence. So adults were also so mischievous when they were little. That Uncle Alex and Auntie Irina are so impressive. They taught them a lesson. I wonder what they look like, and will I be able to see them in the future? If only little Amy could be as powerful as them in the future. Little Amy appraised everyone with a curious look on her little face. As for Yabamia and Sally, they had already turned away and were unable to stop themselves from laughing. A group of 9th-tier giant dragons and demons were ripping each other apart. This was far too hilarious. As expected, this is an unusual negotiation, but it looks like Meg Alex and Irina really were naughty back in the day. From the Demon Island to the Dragon Island, they left behind their glorious deeds everywhere, and this is most likely only the tip of the iceberg, Meg thought to himself. At the same time, he was feeling quite fortunate that his current appearance was completely different from that of Meg Alex. He had changed his appearance, and his disposition was completely different from his own, so he didn't have to worry about these people recognizing him. This exchange of insults lasted for over half an hour, and it slowly became a gathering of reminiscing about the past, following which a peculiar silence abruptly ensued. Tears were welling up in the eyes of both sides as they looked at each other. As expected, the ones who knew them the best were still their enemies. Don't you have any conscience for exposing my painful past? Tauros looked at the 3 of them with a pained expression. Being chased around by the porcupine battle boar back then was a trauma that he couldn't shake off for the rest of his life. Everything was caused by those 2 fellas. However, that arrogant fella is already dead, and that demoness is also locked up. Fox clenched his teeth. It seemed like he still hadn't forgotten the incident where he was chased around Dragon Island naked. What a pity. This world is boring to begin with. It's rare to have two interesting people, but they were erased by this world. This world is really not a good thing. Dracula sighed and said with a look of regret, Everyone looked at Dracula in unison. Dracula, do you want to eat grass again? Gustav asked curiously. Who would want to eat grass? Us vampires definitely won't eat grass. Dracula replied in a serious manner. It's just a pity. I heard that Alex was killed by a sneak attack, and some of our demon race members were also involved. What a despicable act. If you can't fight like a gentleman, then don't provoke him. In my opinion, Alex is a good gentleman. Dracula sighed in a forlorn manner. He's a righteous person and powerful. Alex is indeed the most powerful human I've ever seen, and he's also the knight that I admire the most. Jinx nodded in agreement with Dracula's words. A person like him is destined to die a horrible death. When a human takes pride in slaying dragons and tries to lead this trend, he's already dead, Fox said in a cold voice. What's so pitiful about the scum that died at his hands? They've tarnished the reputation of our dragon race, and they don't deserve to be a member of our dragon race. Havid pursed his lips with disdain. Even if what they did was wrong, that's still our dragon race's business. A puny human like him has no right to judge and punish them. What does he think of our dragon race? Fox gritted his teeth as he glowered at Havid. They chose to fight him, and he killed him fair and square. So what's there to say? As a dragon, you have to accept defeat. Fox, you're such a scumbag. Where's your honor as a dragon? Why haven't you ever discussed killing him on the Dragon Island? Don't you know that? Havid retorted with a disdainful look in his eyes. Havid, is your fire dragon tribe trying to declare war on our frost dragon tribe? Fox gritted his teeth as he glowered at Havid. Fox, what right do you have to declare war on our fire dragon tribe on behalf of the frost dragon tribe? Even if you want to fight, the fire dragon tribe has nothing to fear. Havid glared at Fox with no intention of backing down. The auras of the two of them continued to climb, and the atmosphere in the restaurant became a little tense, as if a battle were going to erupt at any moment. The three demons were completely dumbstruck. They didn't think that a battle would break out between the dragons before they even had a chance to do anything. The two of them who had stirred up the entire continent a few years ago were like taboos. Just the mention of them would be viewed as polar opposites, and conflicts could erupt at any moment. Excuse me, can we serve the dishes now? Right at this moment, a voice broke the tense atmosphere. Everyone turned toward the entrance of the kitchen in unison. Fox's expression immediately darkened, and he forced himself to refrain from lashing out. The other dragons and demons were also quite displeased that their discussion had been interrupted. Even though this human was the father of Crassus' disciple, he was still just a human chef with no power. Some of the ingredients have been prepared for a long time, and if we don't eat them now, they won't taste as good. Meg stood at the entrance of the kitchen with an apologetic expression. It wasn't that he didn't have a discerning eye. If he didn't eat the tofu pudding, rugiamo, and other dishes that had been prepared for a long time, then they wouldn't be up to his standards. Seeing as the discussion has reached an impasse, let's eat something first. I hope you understand that you're here to discuss the border war between the dragons and demons, so it's best if you go back and resolve any internal issues. Michael looked at everyone before nodding at Meg and said, Mr. Mac, please serve the dishes. All right. Meg nodded before entering the kitchen, followed by Yabamiya and Sally. As a vampire, I definitely won't eat food cooked by humans, nor will I be a vegetarian. My only pursuit is fresh blood. Dracula leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs. Hello, this is savory tofu pudding. Chapter 427. Savory Tofu Pudding? Dracula's eyes narrowed as he looked at the white porcelain bowl. There was something white and tender in the bowl, and there was a layer of orange-red sauce on top of it. There were also some chopped pickles and small shrimps scattered on top. An alluring fragrance wafted into his nose. He couldn't tell what it was, but it was different from blood and grass. However, it was so fragrant and alluring, as if it wanted to drill into his heart. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva. What kind of brain is this? What's tofu? A type of magical beast? Why haven't I heard of it before? But this smell is quite fragrant. Do you want to try it? Many questions flashed through Dracula's mind, and he fell into deep thought as he looked at the savory tofu pudding in front of him. Your sweet tofu pudding, your savory tofu pudding. Yabamiya continued to bring out the dishes, and one tofu pudding after another was placed in front of everyone. There were sweet and savory tofu puddings, and they were placed in front of different people. On this occasion, he didn't ask for their tastes. If he didn't ask for their tastes, would they not like it? Besides, this meeting is already very intense. If there's a conflict over the taste of the tofu pudding, wouldn't it worsen the situation even further? Sally was a little perplexed as she looked at Meg, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen with a smile on his face. She didn't understand why he was serving both sweet and savory tofu puddings at the same time. Michael looked at the savory tofu pudding in front of him, then at the different tofu puddings in front of everyone else, and he was also a little perplexed. He had heard about the conflict between Amy's sweet and savory tofu pudding from Robert, and it appeared that Meg was trying to stir up another conflict between the demons and giant dragons. Wouldn't that make the situation even more complicated? I love eating brains. Smashing open skulls and licking the brains that are stained with blood is an unparalleled pleasure. Gustav looked at the sweet tofu pudding in front of him with an excited expression, and he rubbed his hands together as he said, "This owner sure knows how to enjoy himself, but I've never had sweet brains before. Also, what kind of magical beast is this tofu pudding? Why haven't I heard of it before?" Humans are actually the cruelest race on the Norland continent. I've never heard of anything that they can't eat, from the smallest insects on the ground to us dragons. As long as it can move, they'll eat it, even the soil. I would never eat something as indecent as a brain, Jinx said with disdain as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. I've heard that humans are the most proficient cooking species on the Norland continent. I'm really curious about what this savory tofu pudding tastes like. Havett appraised the tofu pudding before him with an intrigued expression. "Ew. Toros, why is yours different from mine?" Dracula glanced at the sweet tofu pudding in front of Toros, then at the sweet tofu pudding in front of Gustav, only to find that they were both different from his. Slurp. Gustav had already scooped a spoonful of sweet tofu pudding into his mouth. Everyone's eyes fell on him in unison. Something cooked by humans can't be that good, right? I'd rather starve to death than eat anything here today. Dracula also crossed his arms in front of his chest as he looked at Gustav, who had his eyes closed. How could it be so delicious? Gustav swallowed the tofu pudding in his mouth before opening his eyes with incredulity in his eyes. He praised, "This brain is so smooth and soft, and it's sweet but not greasy at all. Even though it doesn't reek of blood, it's simply irresistible. It's definitely the best brain I've ever tasted. I've never tasted a brain as delicious as this. No magic beast's brain has ever tasted as delicious as this. It's simply too delicious." As soon as his voice trailed off, he lowered his head and continued to munch on the tofu pudding, completely ignoring everything else. "Are you kidding me? It's just a small bowl of brain, and it's been cooked by a human. How could it be that delicious?" Dracula looked at Gustav with a skeptical expression before taking a glance at the tofu pudding in front of him. He had to admit that the tofu pudding looked very exquisite, and it tasted very special. It didn't reek of blood in the slightest, but it struck him with the urge to give it a try. "Hold on. I can't give in to temptation like this." Dracula pinched his own thigh. He couldn't slap himself in the face like that. Is it really that delicious? Everyone was also rather perplexed, and even Jinx stole a few surreptitious glances at the tofu pudding. Toros and Havett didn't hesitate any longer as they scooped spoonfuls of tofu pudding into their mouths. Oh! Both of their eyes lit up almost in unison. What an incredible flavor! This definitely isn't an ordinary brain. It's simply indescribably delicious, Havett exclaimed as he picked up the bowl on the table and quickly began to devour the tofu pudding. Delicious! It's so delicious! I've never tasted anything as delicious as this. Toros also exclaimed as his rolls of fat jiggled uncontrollably, and he was unable to repress his excitement as he began to slurp down the tofu pudding. It's so delicious. The two officials from the city lord's castle had already begun to eat, and they wore elated expressions on their faces. I didn't think that this tofu pudding would be so delicious as well. It's completely different from the spicy grilled fish, and it's not brain. It's most likely some kind of soy product. I wonder what kind of magical cooking method Mr. Mac used to transform the coarse soybeans into such a pristine white color. The savory sauce is paired with minced pickled vegetables, and the tiny shrimp brings with it the flavor of the ocean. Everything is combined in one bite, and it's absolutely delicious. Michael also scooped a spoonful of tofu pudding into his mouth, and he immediately fell into the trap of deliciousness. One spoonful after another. He simply couldn't stop. No one can resist Father's cooking, not even demons or giant dragons. A smile appeared on Amy's face as she looked at the customers who were completely engrossed in the tofu pudding. It was as if she had already seen through everything. Aside from the sounds of the tofu pudding being eaten, the only sound that could be heard in the restaurant was the occasional exclamation of praise from everyone. The fragrance of the tofu pudding wafted throughout the restaurant, and it only became more pronounced as the tofu pudding was stirred. Chapter 428. Another savory tofu pudding, another sweet tofu pudding. A series of excited and expectant voices sounded. Me too. I'll have another savory tofu pudding. Dracula raised his hand feebly as he looked at the white porcelain bowl in his hand, which had been licked clean. I'll have another sweet tofu pudding as well. Jinx had also finished his tofu pudding, and he didn't feel embarrassed in the slightest. All right, please wait a moment, Yabamiya replied before clearing away the bowls on the table with Sally. Uncle Bat, didn't you say that you'd rather starve to death than have a bite of human food? Amy asked Dracula with a curious expression. Everyone was also looking at him with a hint of mockery in their eyes. After all, he and Jinx were the ones who had objected the most. As a vampire, adapting to different living environments and food is a basic survival skill. Dracula cleared his throat with an awkward expression on his face. His eyes lit up as he looked at Mag, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, and a confident smile appeared on his face as he said, "Furthermore, for vampires, blood and brains are the best food to replenish energy. This tofu pudding is made from brains, so it suits the tastes of us vampires perfectly. We're definitely not vegetarian." My apologies, sir, but tofu pudding isn't actually made from brains of magical beasts. Instead, it's made from soybeans, so it's still vegetarian. Meg smiled at the confident Dracula. How? How could it be made from soybeans? It's clearly made from brains, and it's even more delicious than brains. How could it be vegetarian? Dracula's smile stiffened, and he glared at Meg as he jumped up from his seat, feeling as if his intelligence had been insulted. I think this tofu pudding is even softer and smoother than the brains I've had in the past. How could something like this be made from soybeans? You're not lying to us, are you? Gustav asked with an incredulous expression. The tofu pudding is indeed made from soybeans, and there's no meat or brains added to it. Our restaurant has always operated with integrity, and we never lie to our customers, Mag said with a smile. The names of Chinese dishes were broad and profound. If he were to make connections based on the names of the dishes, the people from the Grey Temple would have to come to the kitchen every day to search for corpses if there was a husband and wife lung slice. It's over. I've become a vegetarian again. Dracula slumped back into his seat as he stared at his bowl, which had been licked clean. He murmured with a hint of self-doubt, I didn't even notice, and I even thought that it was delicious, and I want another bowl. Could it be that I'm no longer a pure vampire? Dracula of Dracula's mouth as well? Of Dracula's face, yes, of course, Dracula. Although the fact that it's a vegetarian dish has severely damaged my confidence, I still have to say that tofu pudding is supposed to be salty, right? How could they add sugar to such a tender thing? This flavor is unimaginable. Dracula abruptly raised his head and looked at Toros with a righteous expression. Bullshit. Tofu pudding is supposed to be sweet. Even though this isn't real brains, Its sweet flavor and smooth texture are simply irresistible. How dare you say it tastes bad? Dracula, we're both demons, but you're going a little too far. Gustav chimed in as he glowered at Dracula. The tofu pudding is a little sweet to begin with, and with the addition of the savory sauce and the rich side dishes, you'll be able to experience the true flavor of the tofu pudding. This is something that you can't experience when you add a spoonful of syrup to the sweet tofu pudding. Fox put down his spoon and looked at Gustav and Dracula with a serious expression as he said, "Tofu pudding is supposed to be salty. Fox, your face is still as foul as ever, but I suddenly feel like you're a lot more pleasing to the eye." As expected, not everyone gets to taste something as delicious as tofu pudding. Dracula nodded as he looked at Fox. "Sweet tofu pudding is the best," Jinx yelled before turning to Havid and asking, "What do you think, Havid?" Havid looked at his bowl and was just about to say something. "You'll have to borrow money from me to pay for the table and chairs," Jinx added. Havid's eyes widened. He didn't think that Jinx would be so shameless. "That's all right, Havid. Tell me what you think, and I'll lend you the money." Gudra waved a hand through the air. "Of course the savory tofu pudding is the best," Havid replied without any hesitation. He looked at Dracula with a pleased expression and said, "Don't worry, Dracula. I'll definitely return the money I borrowed from you." Sweet, salty. The restaurant was instantly plunged into a battle over the sweetness and saltiness of the tofu pudding. Furthermore, the demons and giant dragons, who were originally fighting for the benefits of their respective races, were now divided over a bowl of tofu pudding. The situation was no less intense than before. Could it be that Mr. Mac is trying to break the stalemate and create an opportunity for the tables to turn? Michael turned to Meg with a perplexed look on his face at the sight of everyone arguing with one another. He had presided over many meetings in the past, and he knew that this was a territorial dispute that had resulted in casualties on both sides, so it would take at least half a month for any substantial progress to be made. This was why he had chosen Amy's as the venue for the meeting. He wanted to see if the food would be able to catalyze the progress of the meeting. A situation like this had never happened before. However, if word got out that there was an internal strife because of a delicacy, those old bastards would probably die of anger. Meg merely smiled and didn't say anything, nor did he show any intention of mediating the conflict. He was well aware of Michael's intentions, and in order to get the City Lord's castle to hand over the vacant land to the restaurant as soon as possible, the key to the success of the meeting tonight was to be completed. Just like in his past life, territorial disputes between countries would often come to a stalemate, especially when both sides were more or less equally powerful. In a situation like this, a different approach was required. "Uncle Bat, you were just arguing with the other uncles, and now you're arguing with each other again. Who's the enemy and who's the friend?" Amy asked curiously after looking at them for a long while. Everyone immediately fell silent as they looked at the people sitting across from them, then at their own brethren, and peculiar expressions appeared on their faces. Yabamiya brought out a bowl of tofu pudding and placed it in front of everyone, but no one made a move. Dracula pointed at the red dot on the map. "You want us to cede territory and pay compensation? The dragon race has never done something like this before. If you really want to negotiate, then take back your last request and we can talk again." Fox looked at Dracula with a hint of mockery in his eyes, and he didn't even take a single glance at the map. TSK, your dragon race occupies this golden mountain called the Dragon Island. There are all kinds of rare ores everywhere below. There are countless mountains of gold and silver. Although you don't need most of them on the Dragon Island, you can just casually get some of them as compensation. Why is there a need to be so stiff here? You Dragon Clan are too stingy. Do you want to bury all these treasures in your caves with your dead bodies? Gustav pursed his lips. "Gold is our religion. If anyone dares to target our gold, then be prepared to face the wrath of our Golden Dragon Clan." Jinx glowered at the three of them in a domineering manner. "We giant dragons take pride in collecting precious stones and gold. Who on the Norland continent doesn't know that? There's no way we'll pay compensation. People die in war. If we lose, then we'll have nothing to say about ceding territory and paying compensation. However, We're the ones who are surrounding the island, and you demons are the ones who are trapped on the island. We're already making a huge concession by not asking you to pay compensation, yet you still dare to make such a request? There's no sincerity in this negotiation at all." Fox chuckled coldly and refused to budge an inch. The restaurant fell silent again as the two sides began to engage in an internal discussion. Spatial magic had blocked out all sound, so no one else could hear what they were saying. Compared to the mature politicians in my past life, the talks between giant dragons and demons are indeed a lot simpler. Looks like there's a good chance that we can reach an agreement tonight. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he placed the Rugiamos one by one into a paper bag and gestured for Yabamiya to bring them out. "Boss, should we bring them up now?" Yabamiya was a little perplexed as he looked at Meg. They were in the middle of a heated discussion, so it wouldn't be good to interrupt them. The Rugiamos won't taste good if they're roasted for too long. Bring them up first." Meg nodded with a smile. He was going to be in charge of the pace of this discussion. All right. Yabamiya was a little concerned, but he still nodded obediently. He brought the Rugiamos out and placed one in front of everyone with a smile as he said, "These are Rugiamos. Please enjoy." The aroma of the braised meat wafted over, and the giant dragons and demons who were in the middle of a heated discussion were immediately attracted by the Rugiamos in the paper bag in front of them. Compared to the faint fragrance of the tofu pudding, the aroma of the meat was extremely rich. It was like the aroma of a plump, mature woman. It was straightforward, and it immediately made everyone lose interest in continuing the discussion. Meat is my favorite food. Let me try the taste of meat cooked by humans. Jinx was the first to grab the Rugiamo on the table. He tore open the paper bag, and a reddish-brown braised meat was sandwiched between two white pancakes. The aroma of the meat was countless times richer than that of raw meat, and he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Then, he bit off half of the Rugiamo and began to chew. There were 2 layers of soft and fragrant Rugiamos sandwiched between the Rugiamos. He bit into the Rugiamos, and delicious gravy flowed out. The meat was fatty, but not greasy. Every single taste bud on the tip of his tongue seemed to be cheering and jumping with joy. This was a delicacy that he had never tasted before. This was the right way to eat meat. After swallowing, the delicious taste seemed to have become a little violent. It was running amok in his blood, and his heart was beating faster and faster. Roar! Chapter 430. Jinx was still holding half a Rugiamo in his hand, but a dragon tail covered in golden scales had appeared behind him, and it was slowly sweeping across the ground. However, Jinx was still completely immersed in the delicious Rugiamo, and his expression didn't change in the slightest in the face of the dragon tail that had appeared behind him. He finished the remaining half of the Rugiamo in his hand, and a joyful smile appeared on his face as he chewed. This feeling of swelling blood vessels was simply too comfortable. Even though he didn't know what this violent thing was, he could clearly sense that his body was actively reacting to it, and even his strength seemed to have increased. Even though it was only a sliver, it was still very surprising to him. Of course, the delicious taste of the Rugiamo was also one of the main reasons for this. He had never tasted such delicious meat before. Even the freshest fish in the boundless sea realm couldn't compare with it. This is a delicacy that makes you feel extremely delicious, Jinx thought to himself. He could eat 100 of such delicious Rugiamos. All of the demons and giant dragons were surprised to see Jinx's reaction, but he didn't seem to be reacting in any way. Instead, he appeared to be enjoying the food, so they all began to inspect the Rugiamos in their hands. Golden dragon tail. Yabamiya's eyes widened at the sight of the dragon tail on Jinx's back. However, she immediately covered her mouth and didn't make a sound. Fox looked up at Yabamiya, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Could this little fellow be related to the golden colossal dragon? Fox was a little perplexed as he looked at Yabamiya. He had noticed this half-dragon girl from the moment he had entered the room, but he hadn't sensed any powerful aura from her, so he figured that she was most likely just an ordinary half-dragon who had inherited human talents. But now, his reaction seemed to be a little unusual. However, The golden giant dragons had always been kind to the Draconians. Many of them even directly brought the Draconians to the Dragon Islands to live and enjoy the same treatment as the ordinary dragons. Therefore, there were very few golden giant dragon Draconians wandering outside. Interesting. I just don't know which bastard of the golden dragon tribe she belongs to. Perhaps if there's a need for her in the future, I can keep an eye on her. Fox retracted his gaze and smiled. Dragon Island had never been truly united. Even though the current chief, Rankster, had both the Golden Dragon and Frost Dragon bloodlines, the situation between the two races was still very complicated. Sometimes, someone could be used as a bargaining chip. Even if it was just a small bargaining chip, it still had value. Could it be that Amy is really a half-dragon from the Golden Dragon tribe? Meg also noticed Jinx's golden dragon tail. It was almost identical to the dragon tail that Yabamiya had after eating Rugiamo, except that Yabamiya's dragon tail was longer and thinner, and its scales were more intricate. Dragon tail pie. Amy's eyes also lit up. She looked at Yabamiya, and then at Jinx's dragon tail. She hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything in the end. The Golden Dragon tribe's reaction to eating Rugiamo is the same as Mia's. I've speculated that Mia might have the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe in her, and it looks like that's very likely. Also, the Golden Dragon tribe is very accepting of half-dragons. They'll bring all of their tribesmen back to Dragon Island. I just don't know if Mia will be willing to go. Sally was a little concerned as she looked at Yabamiya. Yabamiya looked at Jinx and opened his mouth. He hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything in the end. He took a few steps back and looked down, trying his best not to show his emotions. Boss, give me 10 more Rugiamos. It's so delicious. Jinx swallowed the Rugiamo in his mouth and sighed with emotion. Humans are so good at cooking. It's so much better than eating it raw. Didn't someone just say that humans eat anything? Dracula raised an eyebrow. Didn't someone say that they'd rather starve to death than eat human food? Jinx retorted, let me try this Rugiamo as well. Dracula smiled sheepishly. He took a bite of the Rugiamo on the table, and his pale face immediately flushed red. He swallowed the Rugiamo and panted as he waved his hand. This Rugiamo is delicious, but it's too strong. We vampires have cold blood, and I can't take it. Even though he said that, Dracula still finished the remaining half of the Rugiamo. His cheeks were flushed, and he looked very happy. He sighed and said, give me another savory tofu pudding. I think that one suits me better. Yes, it's delicious. What an incredible taste. Why don't the pigs in the abyss taste as good as this? I didn't think that humans would be so picky about food. They're so much better than us demons. Exclamations and praises rang out one after another, and they were not stingy with their praises. Meg walked out of the kitchen with a smile and said, we can continue to provide the tofu pudding and Rugiamos. You can open the menu next to you. There are all kinds of dishes that the restaurant has to offer. You can order whatever you want. Dracula looked at Meg with a smile and said, boss, your food is really delicious. Are you interested in coming back to the Demon Islands with me? I promise that your restaurant will be full every day. You won't have to worry about money. Jinx looked at Meg and made an irresistible offer. Screw you. The Demon Islands are poor. Boss, why don't you come back to the Dragon Islands with me? We dragons don't lack gold. As long as you can make such delicious Rugiamos for us every day, you can have as much gold as you want. There's a huge gold mine under the territory of our Golden Dragon tribe. Even we don't know how much gold there is down there. My apologies. I appreciate your kindness, but I don't have any intention of moving my restaurant elsewhere for the time being. Chaos City is a good place. Meg shook his head with a smile. He wasn't stupid. Regardless of whether he went to the Dragon Islands or the Demon Islands, he wouldn't be as free as he was now. Before he recovered his power, he had to develop his strength in a low-key manner. As for making money, he had to let the money follow him. If he followed the money, then he would be led by the nose by the money and lose his freedom. I see. Disappointment appeared on Dracula's and Jinx's faces at the same time. Dracula sighed and said, looks like I have to come to Chaos City to eat delicious food in the future. Chapter 431. Insanely spicy? Sure, please wait a moment. A mysterious smile appeared on Meg's face. You're the one who's asking for it. I'll admit defeat if I don't make you cry today. There's also fish? I love fish. I want a large spicy grilled fish as well, and I want the insanely spicy grilled fish as well. This drawing looks real. Did you use magic to turn all of these dishes into drawings? Havid asked as he flipped through the menu. I hired an amateur artist to draw this, Meg replied with a smile. The system had already upgraded all of the menus to include pictures. Host, please explain what an amateur artist is. Even if this wasn't drawn by the system's drawing skills are at least on a professional level. The system's indignant voice sounded, but Meg ignored it. I want a Yangzhou fried rice. I want a braised chicken and rice. I love chicken. Everyone else also began to place their orders. Meg turned and went into the restaurant to cook, while Yabamiya brought out one dish after another. If it's insanely spicy, do you want to know how to cook 2 insanely spicy dishes? Meg took a glance at Fox before mincing the insanely spicy pepper in his hand. Everyone was no longer in the mood to continue their discussion. All of them looked toward the kitchen with anticipation in their eyes as they waited for the dishes to be served. Uncle Jinx, you broke the chair. You have to pay for it, Amy reminded Jinx. Jinx looked back at the chair that had already been reduced to rubble and scratched his head sheepishly as he said, This Rugiamo was too delicious, and I couldn't help myself. I'll pay for this chair. Here are 10 Rugiamos for you. Do you want me to get you a new chair? Yabamiya made her way over to Jinx with a slightly nervous expression on her face as she carried a tray of Rugiamos over to him. No need. I'll eat standing up so I don't break the chair again. Jinx shook his head with a smile before picking up a Rugiamo. He then turned to Yabamiya with a curious expression and asked, Little girl, what dragon are you? Why are you working as a waiter here? Dragons are a proud race. No matter how delicious the food in this restaurant is, we shouldn't serve others. Yabamiya opened her mouth before lowering her head in a dejected manner. I don't know what kind of dragon I am. Is that so? Jinx looked at Yabamiya in confusion. Yabamiya looked up at Jinx with a serious expression and said, But I like my current job. This job makes me proud, and it doesn't make me feel inferior. This is the life and job that I like. A hint of surprise appeared on Jinx's face at the sight of the confidence and pride in Yabamiya's eyes. Due to their origins, even the golden dragon, half-humans on Dragon Island would have a sense of inferiority complex. However, this little girl gave him a sense of confidence, a sense of pride that was buried deep within her heart. I hope you will never lose your pride and confidence. I wish you good luck. He put the Rugiamo in his hand into his mouth and took a big bite, immersing himself in the delicious taste of the Rugiamo. I will. Yabamiya nodded in a soft voice, as if she were replying to Jinx, but also as if she were talking to herself. She then turned and walked into the kitchen. Here's your insanely spicy grilled fish. Yabamiya soon returned with a large grilled fish and gently placed it in front of Fox. The massive grilled fish was covered in a bright red sauce, and there was a spicy aroma mixed with the aroma of the fish. Just a single whiff of it was enough to make one's throat burn. This smell. Why is the smell of the chili in this restaurant so rich? Just the smell alone is so pungent. It seems to be different from the chili in other restaurants. Fox narrowed his eyes. He had lived in Chaos City for many years, so he was quite familiar with human food. In fact, he was quite fond of spicy food, which was why he had chosen the insanely spicy grilled fish. However, it appeared that the chili in this fish was a little different. At the very least, this level of spiciness was something that he had never seen before. Of course, the aroma of the fish was also something that he had never smelled before. The combination of these two flavors was extremely alluring, and he couldn't help but pick up his chopsticks. A frost dragon eating the insanely spicy grilled fish is probably going to be dehydrated. Michael looked at the grilled fish in front of Fox and shook his head with a smile. Meg hadn't given any indication of the level of insanely spicy grilled fish's insanely spicy grilled fish, so it appeared that he was taking revenge for what had happened at the entrance of the restaurant. This fish doesn't look ordinary. Just smelling this spicy smell makes me feel like my blood is boiling. Havid looked at the spicy grilled fish that Sally had just brought to him, and he couldn't help but gulp. His skin began to turn red, and it looked as if flames were going to erupt from his body at any moment. No, I have to move my chair away this time. Otherwise, I'm going to have to pay for it again. Havid picked up his chopsticks, and he didn't forget to move his chair away. He had already ascertained that even though this restaurant was opened by humans, the food here had some special effects that even giant dragons like him couldn't resist. As a giant dragon, he was indeed quite poor, and due to his poverty, he valued things like money more than anything else. Even though the dragon race would be footing the bill for this trip, there was no guarantee that the dragon race would pay for the broken chair. Both of them picked up a piece of fish with their chopsticks almost at the exact same moment. Arg! Roar! A howl of agony and an excited roar erupted almost at the exact same moment. Fox pressed his hands against the table and panted heavily with his mouth wide open. His face was as red as a monkey's bottom, and a burst of steam rose up from his body. It was as if dry ice had come into contact with water, and the steam soon enshrouded his entire body, creating a spectacular sight to behold. At the same time, Havid threw his head back and let loose a long roar, and his body was already engulfed in flames. Only the hand that was holding the chopsticks wasn't on fire. Who would have thought that there would be such a spicy fish in this world? It's so delicious, and I feel like I'm going to explode from just one bite. I've never tasted such delicious fish before. Havid looked at the grilled fish before him with an excited expression. He picked up another piece of fish with his chopsticks, and the flames on his body burned even brighter as he savored the spicy flavor of the fish wreaking havoc in his mouth. How could there be such a spicy chili? Fox placed his hands on the table, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. He looked at the bright red grilled fish in front of him, and his hand that was holding the chopsticks involuntarily slowly lifted toward the grilled fish. No, absolutely not. If I continue to eat like this, I'm going to make a fool of myself. But why am I losing control of my hands? And why do I feel like I'm crying? Am I crying? Fox's eyes widened as he watched the piece of fish being fed into his mouth. His tears flowed uncontrollably, and the mist rising from his body blurred his vision. He felt as if something was quickly flowing out of his body. Father, why is he crying? Amy turned to Meg with a perplexed expression. Chapter 432. Phew! After finishing the last piece of fish, Fox lay sprawled on the table with his entire body soaked in sweat. He felt as if all of his energy had been sapped away, and he couldn't even hold onto his chopsticks anymore. He was like a salted fish that had lost all of its dreams. How could this flavor be so impactful? I can't control myself. Fox raised his head to look at Meg, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen with a smile on his face. His eyes narrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, could it be that this guy spiked this dish to exact revenge for what happened in front of the restaurant? In any case, Fox felt as if he were completely immobilized. Even when he was in battle, he had never felt as powerless as he was right now. Double insanely spicy. Most people won't be able to handle it, and most dragons won't be able to handle it either. Meg looked at the tear-stained Fox with a smile on his face, and he was in a very good mood. He didn't force him to eat it. He was the one who had finished it, so there was no way he would be blamed for it. Wow, this is so delicious. Give me another large spicy grilled fish. I want the insanely spicy version again. If only I could get you a barrel of beer. Do you sell any beer here, boss? Havid slammed his chopsticks onto the table with an excited expression as he turned to Meg. My apologies, but the restaurant doesn't sell any beer at the moment. Meg shook his head. He was actually quite supportive of the idea of pairing grilled fish with beer, but the system hadn't given him the recipe yet. I see. That's a pity. Havid was a little disappointed, but his eyes immediately lit up as he glanced at the menu beside him. By the way, I saw that ice cream on the menu. Is it made from ice? Can you give me one? Ice cream isn't made from ice, but it is. There are 4 flavors to choose from. What flavor would you like? Meg shook his head as he looked at Havid, who was still engulfed in flames. Just the thought of seeing a huge man on fire eating ice cream was extremely impactful. Any flavor is fine. I just want to have some ice to soothe my throat before having a spicy grilled fish, Havid replied with a nonchalant wave of his hand. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded and turned to enter the kitchen. Blueberry ice cream, please enjoy. Yabamiya quickly made his way over to Havid with an ice cream cone in hand. This is ice cream? It looks a little small, and I can finish it in one bite, but it really is iced. Havid accepted the ice cream before inspecting it. Scorching temperatures swept through the air, and the two ice cream balls that were stacked on top of each other immediately melted. They're that weak? Havid raised an eyebrow as he prepared to bite off one of the balls. Uncle Pyro, you can't eat ice cream like that. You have to lick it. If you eat it with big bites, you won't be able to taste the delicious flavor of the ice cream, Amy hurriedly warned. Is that so? Havid was a little skeptical, but he still obediently stuck out his tongue to lick the melting ice cream. This feeling. Havid's eyes widened as the snow-like ice cream slowly melted on his tongue. The pleasant sensation of the ice cream slowly extinguished the scorching heat brought about by the spicy grilled fish, and a sweet and sour sensation swept through his body like a gentle breeze, making him feel extremely comfortable, and he involuntarily closed his eyes. He saw a petite amethyst dragon resting on a cliff. She raised her proud neck and let out a soft chant with her eyes half closed. Her voice was so cute and enchanting. Even if it was just a meaningless chant, he was still intoxicated. After that, he accidentally made a sound, and she was roused from her sleep. She turned around to look at him with a hint of surprise and wariness in her eyes before flying away. That was the first and only time they had met. He didn't get a chance to ask for her name, nor did he know where she lived, but the image of that purple figure singing with her head held high was etched deeply into his heart. In that instant, he suddenly understood what that feeling was. Perhaps this was what they called love, or perhaps it was what humans often referred to as love at first sight. Uncle Pyro, your ice cream is melting, Amy reminded. Havid hurriedly opened his eyes and licked the ice cream that was about to drip off. He enjoyed the sweet and sour flavor spreading through his mouth as he licked the ice cream with a blissful expression. He turned to Amy with a smile and said, "You're absolutely right, little girl. Licking the ice cream is the correct way to eat it. It's so delicious. Even though she's in Purple Crystal Dragon, perhaps I can visit her on Purple Crystal Island and ask for her name when I get back. At the very least, I won't have any regrets." Havid thought to himself as he licked the ice cream, and a faint blush appeared on his face. Uncle Pyro looks really cute eating ice cream. Father, can Amy have some ice cream as well? Amy turned to Meg as she asked. Of course. What flavor would Amy like? Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at Havid, whose entire body was engulfed in flames, but he was carefully licking the ice cream in his hand. It was indeed quite an adorable sight. Vanilla. Amy hasn't had vanilla ice cream before, Amy replied in a matter-of-fact manner. All right, I'll make it for you. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile before entering the restaurant. Everyone was immersed in the delicious food, and they enjoyed an unprecedented feast. Demons and giant dragons weren't proficient in cooking, and most of the time, they didn't even have the concept of cooking. However, the food that Meg had made today had completely upended their worldview. It turned out that food could become so delicious after being cooked. It was completely different from eating it raw. Burp. A burp sounded in the dining hall. Then, as if it was contagious, the entire dining hall was filled with burps. Even the two civil officials in charge of recording were burping with satisfaction while rubbing their round bellies. City Lord Michael, if the conference continues tomorrow, will it still be held in this restaurant? Dracula asked. Everyone else also turned to Michael upon hearing that. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.